Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Joanne's leaving soon, so we need to get the meeting started. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your patience as we got prepared for the beginning of the meeting. Welcome to the 8th Transportation Committee meeting of this term of Council. We have no regrets. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, Councillor El-Shantiry is happy to be here. Confirmation of the minutes 6, November 13, 2019. Carried. Thank you. Communications, there are none received. I do have a motion to add something to the agenda. And I will ask Councillor Leeper to move it.
That the Transportation Committee waive the rules of procedure to add a verbal update regarding the official launch of the Transportation Master Plan on today's TRC agenda.
It is carried. Carried. Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous et tout. Today marks the start of an exciting project to plan for the future of transportation in our city. Staff are beginning their work to update the 2013 Transportation Master Plan. The TMP is one of the most important files delivered by the Transportation Committee. It is the city's blueprint for transportation growth management policies and the planning, funding, and implementation of our walking, cycling, transit, and road networks over the next several decades. Le PDT est un des plus importants dossiers du comité de transport. Le plan directeur des transports établit les grandes lignes pour la planification, l'aménagement et le fonctionnement des réseaux piétonniers, cyclables, routiers et transports en commun de la Ville d'Ottawa au cours des prochaines décennies. Since the previous master plan in 2013, Ottawa has reached important milestones. We're now a city with more than 1 million people. We've opened the Confederation Line and we're moving ahead with Stage 2 of LRT. We're continuing to see a noticeable shift towards healthy and active transportation, and the city continues to prosper and grow, which is all very good. However, with growth comes mobility challenges such as traffic congestion, affordability of travel, and access needs. We will review the ways in which people, vehicles, and goods move through our city and how this mobility can be achieved responsibly and sustainably for all, including those who have mobility challenges. This comprehensive project will take 2.5 years to complete, with recommendations to be presented to Council in April of 2022. This timeline is necessary to coordinate the official plan review that is underway and to complete an origin destination survey before the network planning and priority setting can take place. I mention the official plan because it is critical to the TMP. Together, these plans guide Ottawa's growth and the supporting transportation networks that will help make Ottawa the most livable mid-sized city in North America. The TMP update will be data-driven, working with our government partners at the NCC. The Origin Destination Survey will be conducted next fall, and it will help us to understand in detail how residents from both sides of the river are moving around the city and where they're going. The data collected from the OD survey will help us identify today's travel patterns and trends. We'll feed this data into our transportation model to forecast the future needs of the city and set out the future network for transit, roads, cycling, and sidewalks, as well as their implementation plans. We'll also look at emerging issues and challenges as transportation systems, technology, and revenue streams continue to evolve. We need a framework to address issues around electrification, automation, integrated mobility, sharing services, equity, and affordability. Input from residents will be critical throughout this process, and there will be several opportunities to have your say throughout the project. We want to hear from people in all areas of the city, from the downtown to the suburbs to our rural countryside and villages. We want to hear how people think our city's transportation systems need to evolve. To this end, we've launched an online survey tool today as the first public touchpoint for the project. As the chair of the Transportation Committee, I would encourage everyone to visit the webpage and complete the survey at ottawa.ca/TMP update. Information such as the project's progress, discussion papers, supporting documentation, study findings, and notifications of future consultation opportunities will be posted, so be sure to visit the site often. Nous avons lancé un sondage en ligne aujourd'hui comme premier point de contact public pour le projet. En tant que président du comité des transports, j'encourage tout le monde à visiter la page web et remplir le sondage à ottawa.ca/mise-à-jour-PDT. Des renseignements comme l'avancement du projet, les documents de travail, la documentation de l'appui, les conclusions des études et les avis de consultation futurs seront affichés sur le site web. Donc, assurez-vous donc de visiter souvent. Merci and thank you. And to my colleagues on the committee, there will be a package of counselor columns and social media stuff that my office should be sending before the end of this meeting. And so with that, thank you.
The end of
The meeting.
the meeting.
So thank you very much. I do have a motion addressing the TMP as well. Whereas the Transportation Master Plan supports Council's vision for sustainable, resilient, and livable Ottawa, and whereas the TMP is a citywide strategic document with a vision that Ottawa's transportation system will enhance our quality of life by supporting social, environmental, and economic sustainability, including protecting public health and the environment. And whereas the scope of work for the review and update of the TMP and the accompanying Ottawa Pedestrian Plan and Ottawa Cycling Plan, approved by Council on June 12, 2019, notes that the TMP update would be guided through consultation at key milestones by the Mayor's Office, as well as the chairs of the Transportation Committee, Planning Committee, Agriculture, Rural Affairs Committee, and the Transit Commission. And whereas the above-mentioned chairs would constitute the Council's sponsors group to champion and help provide strategic direction for the TMP update and accompanying cycling and pedestrian plan updates over the course of the 2.5-year project. And whereas there is value in expanding the membership of the Council Sponsors Group to include the chairs of the Standing Committee on the Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management, and the Board of Health, to ensure potential synergies and opportunities for complementary programs for transportation in the city that require cross-departmental initiatives and cooperation to support the city's climate change and public health objectives. And whereas the Council Sponsors Group would meet at key milestones throughout the project with staff and representatives of the Mayor's Office to act as a sounding board to informally discuss issues and questions and provide feedback to staff on matters relevant to the review of the TMP. And whereas the expanded Council Sponsors Group would not constitute quorum of the Transportation Committee, which is the committee responsible for overseeing and making recommendations to Council on the TMP update. And whereas there is potential that TMP update sponsor group meetings could potentially result in quorum of Planning Committee or the Agricultural Rural Affairs Committee if the ex officio members of Planning and ARAC are taken into account. However, the TMP update sponsors group will not be discussing or otherwise dealing with any matter in a way that materially advances matters under the jurisdiction of those committees. And whereas part of the midterm governance review, the City Clerk's office will be reviewing the procedure bylaw definition of quorum for committees with a view of reflecting the 2018 change to the definition of a meeting under the Municipal Act 2001, as well as the implications of adding ex officio members to the Planning Committee and ARAC on quorum and the implications on sponsors groups. Therefore, be it resolved that Transportation Committee recommend that City Council approve the following membership for the TMP update sponsors group. 1, the Chair of the Transportation Committee, 2, Chair of Transit Commission, 3, Chair of Planning Committee, 4, Chair of ARAC, 5, Chair of the Board of Health, and 6, Chair of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management. Are there any questions, Councillor Menard?
Just quick question, because I think this is a good motion. I want to make sure we're representative of the city. Do we have anybody from the urban core on the sponsors group with that motion? Doesn't appear to be. So it doesn't appear to be. So I'm glad the chair of the Board of Health is there. Makes sense, and chair of the Environment Standing Committee. That's a rural member as well. The chair of the Agricultural Rural Affairs is a rural member. Chair of the Planning Committee, suburban. Transit is suburban. Transportation Committee, we'll see, I guess. So I would just add, if we could add a member of the urban core to the motion, be supportive of it. But let's make sure we're representative of the regions in the city.
Sorry, I saw some hands over here. Was there any?
Just to support Councillor Menard, I think the only person inside the Greenbelt is Councillor Eagle as Chair of Health. The inner core, the 5 urban wards have particular challenges around transportation issues, and I think it's important that we have somebody at the table who can speak to those.
Can I move? Mr. Chair, I don't know how procedurally this would work, but I would recommend we have your vice chair, who is representative of the Corps. I wonder if we could extend the membership to include the Transportation Committee vice chair. In my mind, that would resolve. I just don't know procedurally how that would work, Mr. Chair. So I'll just move to amend the recommendations to include the vice chair of transportation to the membership of this working group.
Yeah, so was there anyone else who wanted to speak to the item? Councillor El-Shantiri.
First of all, I'm not sure, Mr. Chair. I think we should check with legal or the clerk about the quorum, if that committee be extended. My first question. My second is, just like to remind ourselves, what happened to one city, one team? I thought we worked so hard in all the years since amalgamation to become one city, one team, and now we start to divide it up, who should be here and should be there. So I don't have an issue with the vice chair to be added on, but I think we need to focus on the big picture. So we are one city and one team.
Councillor Dudas.
Just for my understanding, the purpose of this sponsors group was merely a sounding board, right? There is absolutely no decision-making authority whatsoever. That would all funnel back up through our committee. Am I correct?
In terms of final decisions, yes. Yeah, the sponsors group helps direct staff on, consultation timing and form and, as a sounding board. Yeah.
So I would be in favor of that amendment. I think it's a responsible and prudent thing to do to have all members of a council reflecting our city as a whole. So I'd be good with that.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to either?
Can we ask the clerk about the quorum if there's more council added to that?
Yeah. So, Madam Clerk or Taffy, if we add the vice chair to the committee, does it affect our quorum issues or the issues under private meetings, et cetera?
Mr. Chair, it may. We did review the specific composition outlined in this motion with the clerk in advance to ensure that those issues would be minimized. If I may recommend, this item, if approved at committee today, will be rising to council next week, which provide time not only to ascertain which members may additionally be interested in participating in this group, as well as review the quorum implications.
Okay, perfect. So how about we approve the motion and ask the clerk to provide a memo or something like that between now and committee, and then provided that there's no quorum issue, then we deal with it at council. Is that agreed? Makes sense. Agreed? Perfect. So on the motion? Carried. Thank you very much. We'll now go through the agenda. We've got the road action plan, which we have presentations and speakers. Term of council priorities is the same. Operating budget, same. Extending operating hours for patios within the newly constructed Elgin Street corridor. We do have a staff presentation, but I have no delegations registered. Can this item be carried? Carried. Elgin Street. Carried. Number 5 is status update, Transportation Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 22 November. There are no delegations or correspondence. That the Transportation Committee received this report for information. Is this received? Received. Thank you. Okay, so we will go back to the Road Safety Action Plan, and we have our team, Mr. Landry, Mr. Wilkinson, and Ms. Tanaka.
Yeah, just here, Mike.
Good morning, Chair Blay and members of the Transportation Committee. It's my pleasure to be here today and recognize my colleagues Krista Tanaka, our program manager for road safety and traffic investigations, who was the lead on this project, as well as Rob Wilkinson, our coordinator of Safe Roads Ottawa. This is the third generation road safety action plan and reflects the direction provided by Transportation in 2017. The report is a culmination of 2 years' worth of effort by our staff, external partners, and almost 3,000 residents who participated in public surveys. I want to acknowledge members of the Road Safety Action Working Group, which includes representations from Ottawa Fire, Ottawa Paramedics, Ottawa Police, and Ottawa Public Health. I also want to acknowledge and thank our external stakeholders who participate in developing this plan. I'm glad to see this summer here today. Their input was invaluable in creating the plan. This plan reflects the principles of Safe System Approach, which is one of the world's leading road safety frameworks. It's also the basic framework that Sweden and the Netherlands and other leading countries use around the world. Specific principles of Safe System Approach are human life and health are prioritized, shared responsibility between roadway providers, regulators, and users. Human error in roads should not lead to death or serious injury. It requires a change in road safety culture by all, and the plans that are data-driven. So at this point, I'm going to pass things over to Rob, who will walk us through the plan.
Thank you very much, Phil. So as Phil mentioned, this is actually our third iteration of the Road Safety Action Plan. The first one took place from 2003 to 2011, and it was the program itself was referred to as the Integrated Road Safety Program. In 2009, Transportation Committee directed staff to undergo a refresh of the program and accommodate best practices and research from across the world. And in 2011, November of 2011, the current generation or the previous generation of the plan was approved by City Council, and that was the creation of Safer Roads Ottawa. The direction from City Council and Transportation Committee that we received in the refresh of the current plan were to undertake the principles undertake the principles from a Vision Zero framework, as Mr. Landry just mentioned, undergo community consultation and involve our partners and residents, look at a self-funding model for the plan moving forward, and certainly engage in a robust communications plan moving forward so that residents understand what we're doing moving forward. I think I keep hitting the wrong button. Good thing I'm on road safety and not this kind of stuff. From there, so some of the successes that we've experienced over the past 7 years. Overall, between 2012 and 2017, there was a 14% reduction in fatal and serious injuries in our community. We've installed 63 red light cameras, or we're up to 63 red light cameras in full operation. 50,000 students have attended the Drop It and Drive, Distracted Drive presentations across the city. We now have, thanks to our partnership with the Ottawa Police Service, 5 automated license plate recognition systems in effect. And as many of you know, at any given time on the City of Ottawa roads, there are 25,000 suspended drivers. From there, just earlier this year, we launched the province's first school bus stop arm camera program. And we're happy to announce that we continue to lay charges for people who actually pass stop school buses. And last but not least is the launch and the initial launch of the Fatal Collision Review Committee, which in 2018 was the recipient of the Canadian Association Chiefs of Police Traffic Safety Award. So where are we? What is our story, and where do we sit currently? So from 2013 to 2017, on average, we have close to 15,000 reported collisions happening on our roadways. Of those, 149 are fatal and major injury collisions per year on average. That provides us with a rate per 100,000 of 2.8, which is similar to many of the European countries which are considered leaders from a road safety perspective. What's interesting about collisions in general, only 1% of them result in a fatal and major injury. And some of the overview that we've done, we know that 48% of them happen at intersections, 43% of them are a result of one form of aggressive driving or another, speeding, distracted, tailgating, and so forth. 26% involved pedestrians, 21% involved collisions in our rural areas, 15% involve motorcyclists, and 11% involve cyclists. So as part of the overall refresh of the program, we wanted to take a look at how we could have a very large systemic impact on what's going on our roads, from a policy perspective all the way down to some granular things that we do as staff. And this is a good visual that touches on a lot of the different policies that are currently in place or are being refreshed, as Phil was mentioning, or Mr. Landry was mentioning a couple of minutes ago, and as did Chair Blais, the Transportation Master Plan, the Ottawa Pedestrian Plan, but some of the new ones that we are looking to introduce is a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit in residential areas. We're talking about introducing road safety audits to all major reconstruction projects. And for those who may not know, the road safety audit actually provides us with the opportunity to engage a third party to review those plans. And those plans are looked at from all road users. And specifically, we look at the human factors involved. So what will the average driver, the average cyclist, and the average pedestrian, how will they function on this roadway? And as a result, we get that audit, and as staff, it's our job to respond to that and ultimately make the plan safer from the get-go, and not wait for it to be built and then discover that we're going to have challenges for those who cross the road, for those who bike on it, and certainly for those who drive on it. The other item on this slide that we'd like to draw your attention to is we believe it is the first in Canada where we're going to be introducing a road safety school for all city staff who are involved in touching the road safety file from the planning side, the design side, and from the build side, and certainly from the operation side. So this is going to be our opportunity to orient staff about the new direction moving forward, is that safety trumps flow. And we want people to be thinking about safety at all aspects of their requirements on their job. Where did we, or how did we go about with regards to the community consultation? We hosted 4 community consultations in total involving just about 24 or 23 different community partners. We did have an online survey which generated about 3,000 responses from residents. And we also held individual meetings with our elected officials, our Safer Roads Ottawa internal partners, and a variety of other community partners. So a lot's been said about Vision Zero and some of the different frameworks that are currently in existence, but I think it's good to set the tone, as Mr. Landry said, about really what is the safe systems approach. And other jurisdictions may call their plans something different, but the vast majority of the road safety action plans that are in place right now follow a safe systems approach. Human life and health are prioritized. There's a shared responsibility between roadway providers, the regulators, like the province of Ontario, and certainly the users of the road. Human error on the roadway should not lead to death or serious injury, so we need to build safety into our ecosystem from the get-go. Road safety requires a change in culture, and this is a generational shift. Although this is a 5-year plan, every other jurisdiction that has gotten on to this kind of framework, it's taken them at least a generation, so a full 25 years, to achieve some of their targets. And in some cases, those targets have not been achieved. And we can speak to that a bit more a little bit later. And certainly, it's important to understand that there is a North American versus European context when it comes to road safety. In the European context, one of the biggest changes is the vast majority of the countries that are engaged in being proactive and making a difference on the roads have the full support, if not direction, of their federal governments. It is a top-down approach, and with that approach and support also comes significant amounts of funding to the hundreds of millions of dollars. In Australia, just recently, they've actually increased their road safety funding by approximately $2.2 billion. So that is the difference in the North American context, where cities are the drivers of change. So the one level of government which has the biggest challenge with regards to economics are the ones driving some of the most expensive changes in society. So we wanted to make sure that that point was kind of clarified, because too often we hear their Vision Zero versus our Vision Zero, and it's an important differentiation. So after all the focus testing and the community engagement, we've landed on the following theme, vision, and goal. The theme itself, and there's a document in front of you that highlights this, but it's about think safety. So we want everyone who's touching the roads, everybody who's planning these roads, to think safety. And the people who are using the roads, we have to act safely. So we have to follow our responsibilities under the Highway Traffic Act as drivers. We have to drive to the posted speed limit, not in excess. We have to get off our cell phones. We have to stop drinking and driving. We have a fundamental responsibility to do what's expected of us. From there, our vision for the plan is a comprehensive and proactive strategy to make Ottawa roads safe for all users. Regardless of how you move around our city, we want it to be as safe as possible for you. And overall, our goal is a reduction in average annual rate of fatal and major injuries by 20% or of 20% by 2024. This is in line with many jurisdictions in the European context. They may have an overall vision of zero, but they set very specific targets in order to be able to manage and evaluate the investments that are being made at every step of the way. So I'm only going to touch on components of the next few slides as they are provided in your packages, but we've fallen onto 4 emphasis areas. The first one, which is probably the most common that most individuals will have heard of, are vulnerable road users. So individuals who walk, individuals who bike or motorcycle across our community. From there, out of the 743 fatal or major injuries that occurred in that 5-year time frame of 2013 to 2017, 190 of them were people who were walking. 110 of them were people on motorcycles, and 81 were people who chose to bike. So some of the pictograms that we wanted to put here to give a bit more of a visual sense to it, and some of the high-level changes that we're looking at putting in place for 2020. We're going to be looking at new mid-block pedestrian signals. We're looking at additional no right turns on reds. We're looking at increasing the funding for the walking school buses. We're looking at increasing the funding for the adult school crossing guard program, and we're certainly looking at installing more advanced walk signals for pedestrians. Because the research shows if we allow pedestrians the head start on motor vehicle traffic, we actually will see a reduction in injuries. From there, with regards to cyclists, we're going to continue to look at 10 different locations where we can actually make improvements for cyclists. We're going to be continuing to look at the high-volume cycling and vehicle interaction locations and look at what we can be doing there. We're going to continue to seek out new cycling safety technology and put it in place. And certainly, we're working closely with our colleagues on transportation planning to continue the expansion of the cycling network. From a motorcyclist perspective, we've seen a sharp increase in fatalities relating to those who choose to move around our city on motorcycles. We are going to be launching a Take It to the Track initiative to encourage some of the motorcyclists who do want to go at speed or greater than the posted speed limit to take it to a racetrack. It's a bit of a different concept than what we've done in the past. We certainly are going to be undertaking a comprehensive review of all the motorcycle fatal and serious injury collisions and look at what can be done at those locations to make it safer. And we're going to approximately triple the number of individuals who we put through an enhanced safety course offered with Motorcycle Masters in the past 2 years. So that'll be about 300 motorcyclists that will offer that specialized training, which is all about collision avoidance and emergency braking. The second emphasis area is intersections. Almost half of our fatal and serious injuries happen in intersections, and that works out to be about 354. So what are some of the interventions? We're going to be looking at our signal timing at approximately 200 locations. We're going to continue to implement roundabouts, which are a proven safety measure that make it safer for everyone moving through them. We also have a responsibility to undertake at-grade rail crossing improvements as part of the direction from Transportation Canada. We're going to continue to look at emerging safety devices and technology and see how we can apply that onto our roads. And we're also looking at installing fully protected arrows at up to 12 different locations, which advance vehicular traffic differently at a different time than the others. New for this iteration of the Road Safety Action Plan is an emphasis area focused on our rural areas, and our rural residents. More fatal injury collisions happen on our rural areas than anywhere else in the city. And we're actually one of the few jurisdictions of our nature, based on the makeup of our city, where this is true. So we're looking at about 157 of the 753 happen on our rural roads. What's important to note about this is although those FMIs, so those fatal and major injuries, only 21% were on citywide, accounted for citywide, there's an overrepresentation of fatalities in our rural areas, as it represents 34% of all the people killed on our roads. So what are we doing? We're looking at improving. There's 12 skewed intersections in our rural areas. We're looking at creating new functional designs, and when possible, we'll be modifying those locations. We're looking at improving the process for road shoulder maintenance. We're undertaking a comprehensive review of stop locations in our rural areas along different corridors and looking at enhancements like LED beacons as possible. We're going to be looking to work with our colleagues in infrastructure services, and having a lot of the new road network as it's being rebuilt would be built with safety edges, which is a very, very simple application which allows drivers to recorrect. If they happen to drive off the road, instead of hitting the gravel right away, there's an extra bit of asphalt that'll be installed, which will allow the driver to recorrect and hopefully prevent those run-off-the-road collisions. And we're certainly going to continue to see our partners from the Ottawa Police Service do some enhanced enforcement in the rural areas. The last category, and this is probably the first time that a jurisdiction in Canada has framed it this way, our fourth emphasis area is high-risk drivers. This used to be referred to as aggressive driving, but as part of the direction that we received from Transportation Committee, and certainly from our community partners, they wanted us to be a bit more, how would you say, direct with regards to who these people are. We used to refer to them as aggressive drivers. We've reframed that and said they're basically high risk because their behavior leads to an enhanced risk for the rest of us to be out on the road. So those 25,000 suspended drivers who are very much active, and some of the best stories that I've received or scariest stories I've received from the Ottawa Police Service is one individual was actually stopped 4 times by the automated license plate recognition system in 5 months. One gentleman was stopped on his way home from work, and that very next morning he was back driving, again as a suspended driver, and stopped by the very same officer. So people aren't getting the message, and they are high risk, and we know that from our fatal collision review meetings, is these people, suspended drivers, tend to get involved into fatal collisions. So from there, out of the 743 collisions, 450 involved high-risk behavior of one kind or another by drivers. 322 were that aggressive driving, so speeding and so forth. 261 involved inattentive driving or distracted driving. And last but not least, although we've made significant progress, 63 involved impaired driving. What are we going to be doing about high-risk drivers? We're going to continue with the implementation of red light cameras. We're going to continue with the gateway speed limit areas. We're going to continue to work very, very closely with our partners at Public Health and the Ottawa Police Service about communication and education programs aimed at those individuals. Certainly, we're looking very much forward to the automated speed enforcement project, and we'll be able to provide a quick update on the next slide about that. We're going to continue to work with our colleagues in transportation planning with traffic calming initiatives, and certainly we very much encourage the police to keep doing all of the heavy lifting with regards to enforcement and to take these people off the road. With regards to automated speed enforcement, the regulations were approved and are in effect as of December 1st, 2009. The changes made to the regulations must be reviewed by the steering committee, the Automated Speed Enforcement Steering Committee, to determine the impact. The province has now asked for a 90-day warning period to be put in place prior to full-fledged enforcement. And as staff, what we are now looking at is the earliest start to enforcement in the City of Ottawa of the automated speed enforcement is the spring of 2020. So when it comes to funding as a key ingredient to how we're going to make change in the future, in 2019 our budget for all road safety initiative programs was approximately $21.1 million. In 2020, that number is going up to just about $27.5 million. And we have a breakdown there of how we, how we actually basically, how we make the investments based on the different emphasis areas. When it comes to the 2020 budget, we're also looking at, because of Transportation Committee and Council's direction, we have an enhanced $4 million, and that is the implementation plan that you see in front of you. So as staff, we put that together with the understanding that moving forward, the funding that's going to come or the revenue that's generated from automated speed enforcement, so those speed cameras, the license plate recognition system, the school bus cameras, and certainly the red light cameras that are coming online beyond 2020 will help augment, or we hope augment, that $4 million. So from a structural perspective, one of the changes that we've decided to make here, after certainly speaking with our internal and external stakeholders, is to certainly add the stakeholder and external partners working group. We, as Safer Roads Ottawa, had regularly been involved or engaged with our local partners, but what we're doing here is we're actually committing to having that group meet on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis, so that they're brought up to speed with the progress that we're making, just as much as we would be doing with our internal staff. And certainly, we would be feeding all of that information to our internal steering committee. And as many of you know, it has representation from very senior management and senior leadership, as well as the regional supervising coroner, Dr. Louise McNaughton-Filion. From a communications perspective, we were tasked with a robust strategy to roll out the plan. So we're looking at a 2-year comprehensive communications plan. It will involve all forms of media, social, radio, and also TV, to educate residents on the improvements and some of the messaging that we want to get across. And we are going to be working much closer with all of our internal and external partners to deliver on those messages. The awareness and education campaigns will be focused on creating that culture change, and focusing on our emphasis areas and making sure that residents understand why the investments are being made. And last but not least, the foundation of it is it will be data-driven, as all road safety action plans should be.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you very much for all your hard work. We do have a number of delegations. There are also some motions from committee members that I'd ask to be introduced before we take delegations, just to kind of ease the process. But before we do that, just very quickly, on the regulatory changes related to automated speed enforcement, how do those changes announced by the province affect our implementation?
Mr. Chair, the regulations were approved last week, as mentioned by Mr. Wilkinson. There were significant changes to them that weren't expected by the steering committee. One of the biggest changes was that it includes this 90-day warning period. That wasn't anticipated previously. We had hoped to roll it out on the effective date in early December, but now we're looking at a start date of potentially March.
Thank you. And then in terms of the signage?
The signage will be different than what was already communicated to us by the MTO previously. So the signs will be a little bit larger than previously identified. Instead of a single sign that had a picture of a camera and the word speed vitesse on it, there now will be 2 signs, one in English, one in French, that says that a municipal speed camera is in use. That will be the regulatory sign that accompanies the camera when it is active, but the warning signs that will have to be placed for 90 days in advance will be similar. 2 separate signs, one English, one French, side by side, that will read the speed camera, municipal speed camera coming soon.
So just so that I can visualize this, where in the locations where we're piloting it, we're going to have one of those giant signs that was here last meeting saying speed enforcement coming soon, and then we're going to have a sign saying you're entering a community safety zone, and then you're going to have another sign saying this is an automated speed enforcement zone. Is that basically right?
It'll be the community safety zone sign first,
Sure.
Then the warning sign. When the 90-day period is over, we'll remove the warning sign and put up the regulatory sign in that same spot. They're 15 centimeters narrower than the community safety zone signs, to give you some perspective.
Okay. Great visual distraction in our school zones. So if there are motions, I would ask that they be introduced now before we take public delegations. Councillor Menard.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair Blais. Councillor Leeper, I believe, is going to introduce the 30-kilometer-an-hour motion. There is another one here as well on the advocacy to the federal government. Would you like me to introduce that one?
Yeah, can you just read them all out?
Okay, sounds good. So I'll just do the therefore be it resolved on this one. Therefore be it resolved that City Council, through the Mayor, formally requests that the Government of Canada and Province of Ontario establish significant dedicated road safety infrastructure funding to help fund road safety projects within the City of Ottawa to further progress towards zero fatalities and serious injuries. And the other motion that I want to introduce is adding a section 5 and 6 to the recommendations. Section 5 would read that the City of Ottawa adopts the goal of zero fatalities on our streets with a meaningful year-over-year reduction by 2035, with a focus on safety for the most vulnerable users of our transportation system, pedestrians, school children, older adults, and cyclists. And 6, that staff bring back options as part of the 2021 SRSAP annual report with operational and capital cost implications that will work towards zero traffic fatalities on our roads by 2035.
Okay, thank you. If the clerk's office could circulate those in paper for everyone, that would be great. Councillor Leeper has a motion as well.
Thanks, Chair. As we continue to try to achieve 30 kilometers per hour across the core urban area and accelerate that, we have a motion that whereas 30 kilometers per hour is the target operating speed, which minimizes severity of motor vehicle collisions involving cyclists or pedestrians under a safe systems approach to road safety, and whereas cyclists and pedestrian volumes are highest within the core, and whereas the City of Ottawa Strategic Road Safety Action Plan recognizes that one fatal or serious injury collision is one too many, and whereas staff have undertaken an evaluation of the cost to implement measures to bring all roadways within the core residential gateway speed limit area into compliance with the policy for posting a 30 kilometer per hour speed limit on an existing roadway as part of response to motion 16.5 item G, included as document 2 in Strategic Road Safety Action Plan update and report. Therefore, be it resolved, the Transportation Committee recommend that staff develop a plan within existing budgets for the gradual implementation of 30 kilometer per hour speed limits in all gateway speed limit areas within the core residential area as defined in the SRSAP, and with the intent to meet the requirements for a posted 30 kilometer per hour speed limit in consultation with ward councillors through their TTC budgets and other funding mechanisms as per the policy for posting a 30 kilometer per hour speed limit on an existing roadway.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other motions before we go to delegations? Okay, seeing none. So members of the public, you have the report and you have those motions in front of you. Our first delegation is Mr. Alex Cullen from the FCA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, the Federation of Citizens Associations is an umbrella organization representing 55 community groups in Ottawa. We do meet regularly to discuss civic issues, and safety on our city roads has occupied a lot of our members' attention. In 2017, following a workshop for our members on updating the city's 2013 Transportation Master Plan, the FCA came to this committee with a number of recommendations, including a recommendation for City Council to develop a Vision Zero program with a suggested target date of 2030 to reach zero fatalities on our roads, 2030 being the 175th anniversary of the incorporation of the City of Ottawa. We also recommended that the city develop an intensive public education campaign to change our road culture so that both car drivers and cyclists could share our roads safely. The FCA reiterated these positions in the 2018 city budget process, and again in the 2019 city budget process. We reaffirmed our position again today at our October general meeting and are here before you today to make the same recommendation. We recognize that this Road Safety Action Plan version 3 is an improvement over the previous versions. There is a 10% increase in the base budget for the RSAP from $25 million to $27.5. There's also an additional one-time injection of $4 million to expand the Road Safety Action Plan activities. And there's a new goal in this RSAP to measure progress on road safety, a reduction of fatalities and major injuries on our roads by 20% by 2024. This is progress, but at a very modest pace. It is insufficient given our current average of 24 fatalities a year and 125 major injuries a year on Ottawa's roads. Our population is growing. We have more and more cyclists on the roads, pedestrians as well, the result of city policies to encourage active transportation, and the number of cars and trucks on our roads are also increasing, well over 500,000. This very modest pace of change regarding safety measures in this Road Safety Action Plan means that we will still have traffic fatalities and injuries, many of which can be avoided through good road design. In fact, your consultant, CIMA Canada, states in document 1 of this report, if the current safety efforts by the city and its partner agencies are maintained but not altered, the likelihood is low that a significant reduction in either the number or severity of FMI collisions will be achieved, especially in the context of increasing traffic volumes. To succeed in effectively reducing collisions within the city by enhancing existing programs or developing new ones, significant additional resources are required. It is evident from reviewing both Document 4, which deals with existing programs, and Document 5, the new initiatives of the Road Safety Action Plan Update Report, many of the RSAP programs and initiatives tinker at the margins. Of the 22 items identified in Document 4 as program deliverables for the $27.5 million investment here, only 3/4 make actual physical changes to improve road safety at a cost of $20 million. Doesn't go far enough. For example, if only 2 warranted pedestrian signals will be installed, out of how many in the city? If only 1 intersection will qualify pedestrian safety enhancement, out of how many in the city? Some 10 locations will be upgraded under the cycling safety enhancements. How long will it take to complete this program throughout the city? Some 12 to 13 neighborhoods will receive gateway speed limit signage restricting speeds to 30 or 40 kilometers an hour. How long will it take to cover all residential communities? And of the 58 initiatives identified as part of the $4 million in one-time additional funding, only 18 projects have actual funds identified, and only 15 will actually change road infrastructure to improve safety. For example, some 10 intersections will receive high visibility ladder markings to improve pedestrian safety. Out of how many in the city? A new leading pedestrian interval guideline will be developed and implemented for 300 locations. But how many locations have funds to make these changes? Only 1 high cycling vehicle intersection will be studied for potential modification at a cost of $380,000. What about the others across the city? After developing a systemic approach to review and prioritize protected left turns to avoid collisions, only 10 will be implemented. Out of a possible how many? Only 3 elementary schools out of over 350 in the city will have traffic calming measures implemented. How long will it take to do the others? To repeat the consultant's report or comment, if the current safety efforts of the city and its partner agencies are maintained but not altered, not significantly altered, is low, that a significant reduction in either number or severity of FMI collisions will be achieved, especially in the context of increasing traffic volumes. To succeed in effectively reducing collisions by enhancing existing programs, developing new ones, significant additional resources are required. In short, the measures identified in the Road Safety Action Plan are far too modest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cullen. Your time is up.
Okay.
Are there questions for Mr. Cullen? Councillor.
Thanks very much, Chair. Given the FCA's position on setting a target date and looking to come back with a plan, are you in support? Is the FCA in support of items 5 and 6 that were added here today? The FCA as an organization, given their position.
Yes, we would support that. We look forward to seeing those reports come back, and also what the program that will achieve reaching that goal. This is our 3rd time coming here asking for this, and I'm glad to see that a motion is being presented today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Cullen. The next delegation is Michelle Perry. morning, Michelle. You can sit there.
I have a presentation
You have a presentation.
that was to be
Yeah, Matt, do we have it
set up for me.
loaded?
Sorry, I thought
So
it would be
Matt-
provided on the laptop.
Yeah, Matt will just load it up here.
I sent it in the
Sure. Michelle, if it's okay, we'll just have the next delegation go while they get your presentation put on a jump drive, and then we'll move it over to the computer. So Rob Barnes from Ecology Ottawa. Thanks very much, Mr. Barnes. You have 5 minutes, as you know, and I'll try to give you a wave when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. Just setting up the presentation. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. My name is Rob Barnes. I'm here on behalf of Ecology Ottawa, and it's a pleasure to talk this morning about the Road Safety Action Plan update. Just wanted to start off by saying thank you to city staff for the hard work on this document, as well as to the city for its consultative process. Ecology Ottawa was part of that process, and we appreciate that. At a high level, though, we would say that the 20% reduction in road deaths envisioned in this document is not enough. It's not vision zero. It does not go far enough. And I think, like FCA, we say that the document is a positive step, but a small one. And it ignores more meaningful policy and budget measures that could be implemented. We appreciate, though, that staff were given a very narrow mandate. So the question is really for the Transportation Committee and for Council, where is the political will for more meaningful progress? As we all know, time is precious and lives are on the line. So in terms of positive elements of this report, we saw additional spending, additional staff resources, annual reporting, more traffic calming in school areas, and some really good policy recommendations, especially around the 30 kilometers per hour target. Not 300, that would be bad. So those are some positive steps that we saw. And I just want to, back this up and give you some broader framing. Obviously, we know we're in a climate emergency and we need a dramatic shift away from motor vehicles. We see Vision Zero as not only a road safety measure, as something important in that respect, but also a necessary part of the climate transition. This is a pie chart that many of us are familiar with. 44% of Ottawa's community emissions come from our transportation sector, how we move around the city. And if we look at the trend lines over time, we can see that while emissions from things like buildings have declined, emissions from transportation are going up or flatlining. And so there's a real question as to what we're going to do in terms of tangible measures to get more people taking their bikes, walking, and engaging in active modes of transportation. On the political front, this is a political question. This policy is really, this document is really good about suggesting concrete measures forward, but ultimately the question remains a political one and one of budget allocation when we compare the road growth project funding to road safety initiatives in the 2020 draft budget. You can see that road growth projects are more than doubled in terms of the size and scale. Another point for context is just to compare. We often hear that Ottawa compares well with European countries like Sweden, but we should note that in the very report that we're talking about, we compare it to Stockholm as well. We've got a long way to go if we're going to catch up to leading European cities. It's one thing to compare us to a country as a whole. It's another to compare Ottawa to other cities that are showing a lot of political will on this question. In terms of what this report means, this has been discussed to a certain extent in the media, but we just want to put some hard numbers on it. This is what an 80% reduction looks like. We'll have 26 people dying, 26 pedestrians dying across 4 years by 2024, 6 cycling deaths, 15 motorcyclists dying, 14 vehicle passengers, and 49 drivers. We know these incidents impact us all, and documents like this are a step forward, but we need to take stronger, more urgent action. So we do have some questions from the report as we read through it. There's a question as to what it would actually cost to achieve Vision Zero. especially if we focused on policy solutions. We looked a lot at local streets in this report, which was great, but there's a question as to why there's a certain level of silence on design solutions for collectors and arterials. What are the current net revenues from the automated speed enforcement dedicated to road safety? That's a question that came up. What are school safety priorities for schools on arterials? We heard from FCA too. There's a limited number of schools where safety will be addressed. What's the plan to address it more fully? We also appreciate the focus on leading pedestrian intervals that was in the report. But there's a question as to why there's a focus on the central business district to the exclusion of other areas of the city. Finally, is this report being brought to other departments and agencies like the Ottawa Police Service and the Board of Health? What we didn't see in the report, again, these are the policy solutions at a high level that might make really substantive changes and that don't cost that much, but it takes political will. Car lane reductions, car-free zones, mandatory changes in street design for all streets, restrictions by vehicle type, mandatory and retroactive speed reductions on streets, mandatory no right turn on red, and commitments to change the distributions of funding going forward. So with my remaining 15 seconds, we've just got a few suggestions. We hope the city will adopt Vision Zero, obviously with a target, but we hope that we'll adopt it immediately with a focus on policy change. Integrate strong policy language in the new transportation master plan. We're excited to see that those consultations have started, and make streets a bigger budget priority than an expanded road network. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Are there any questions for the delegation? Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. Just on, thanks for being here. On the motion that has been moved on item 6, it talks about bringing back options as part of the 2021 SRSAP annual report with operational implications and capital implications to work towards zero traffic fatalities. Is that something that you're getting at here, that you want to see a target, you want to see costs come back? What options do we have to do that?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we would like to see the city lay out a plan for zero and then talk about the budget measures that would be required to meet that target.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Leeper.
The final point that was made with respect to adopting Vision Zero, why is that language important to you? So one of the things I struggle with is, this report speaks to a safe systems approach. Clearly the goal is zero fatalities and zero major injuries on our roads. How does that differ substantively from what you're suggesting?
I think I think we don't want to get too lost in the semantics between different systems. It's not as if one system is innately superior to the other, but I think the reason that we use Vision Zero is because it's clear about its target.
Okay.
And clear about the idea that we need to plan to get to zero, and also that the idea that it's incumbent on us as a city to design our roadways in a way that eliminates severe injury and death. And that's a political question that we can tackle.
But do you see that in the existing, the Safe Roads Plan that has been brought forward? Is that emphasis on design, enforcement, everything in order to try to bring FMIs to zero?
I think that if we were, the Vision Zero piece is a target, and then the idea would be that a lot of the elements that are already in this plan are a great start. It's a question of how do we get there? What's the level of ambition that's required from a budgeting, from a policy perspective? Yep. And so this one is a Vision 20% reduction, and that's not far enough for us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Michelle, I think we are ready for you. Perfect. So you have 5 minutes, and I'll try to give you a little wave at 30 seconds.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. So I'm here today as a member of the board of the Healthy Transportation Coalition. And I'm going to focus on speed reduction because the way this new plan approaches speed reduction is not based on Vision Zero principles. and it demonstrates longstanding problems with the city's Safe Streets policy. Now, this is true. From the report, speed reduction is one of the core considerations within a safe systems approach. And why is that? It's because we have soft bodies that are vulnerable to overwhelming force. When that force is kept to 30 kilometers per hour or less, death is much less likely. In fact, if you look at what other cities are doing, particularly those cities with the lowest fatality and serious injury rates, like Stockholm, you'll see that widespread 30 kilometer per hour limits are quite normal. So normal that two of the founders of Vision Zero say this: if a city does not have a plan for speed management that limits drivers to 30 kilometers per hour, where streets are used by pedestrians, it is not a city that is serious about Vision Zero. So which cities are serious about Vision Zero? A lot of them are in Europe, but we're seeing more cities in North America stepping up as well. Montreal is an example, reducing main streets to 40 kilometers per hour and residential streets, all residential streets, to 30 as part of Vision Zero. Another example is Toronto, which has also taken steps. They've already reduced nearly 400 kilometers of local streets to 30K. They did this in 2015. Researchers from Sick Kids are looking at the effect on injury collisions. It's looking like it's had an effect, but we don't have the research out yet. But more research is coming out showing that blanket speed reductions using signs alone reduce fatalities and injuries. Here are some recent results from Bristol. They put in place widespread 30 kilometer per hour speed limits, with some exceptions. This was signs only. This resulted in a 63% reduction in fatal injuries. And the researchers are recommending that other cities put 30 kilometer per hour limits in place citywide, as opposed to just in restricted areas of a city. But of course, that's our philosophy in Ottawa, and this new plan perpetuates it. I want to acknowledge that setting 30 kilometers per hour as the target speed for all new and reconstructed streets is great, and the kind of system-wide change that we need, but it's not nearly enough. It does nothing for those of us using existing streets. And this goes to the heart of the problem with the city's Safe Streets policies. The right thing is done, but only for certain streets, certain neighborhoods. We get a 30 kilometer per hour zone here, some cycle tracks there, some proper year-round traffic calming over there. And we're supposed to believe that this makes us a Vision Zero city. It doesn't. There's still far too much time and too many resources spent explaining to us why we can't have safe streets, instead of just doing everything in your power to deliver them. Life and health can never be exchanged for other benefits within the society. This is from the founder of Vision Zero, and it's central to that philosophy. Note that it doesn't say protect life and health unless it reduces parking or slows traffic flow. Life and health are the priority. And those who suffer most when we don't put life and health first are the poorest. It's no surprise that huge parts of the Glebe and Old Ottawa South will have 30 kilometer per hour speed limits, while the traffic burden continues to fall elsewhere. This is research from Sick Kids, Toronto, which has found that the lowest income children are 52% more likely to be hit by drivers than the highest income children in Ontario. And if we continue with the way we are, this divide between the haves and the have-nots in terms of safety on our streets will just continue. So here are some simple recommendations. Sign all local streets 30 kilometers per hour. Reduce speeds on all streets in every school walk zone. That's not just in front of the school. Those are all the streets that children use to walk to school. Please audit the traffic calming and temporary traffic calming programs so that you're using only the most effective methods. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions to the presenter? Seeing none, thanks very much, Michelle, for coming in.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Miranda Gray. Miranda, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Miranda Gray. I'm speaking on behalf of the Convent Glen Orleans Woods Community Association. This summer, a young cyclist died in our area, and that is why I'm here. He died in an area that would not be impacted by some of the decisions we are making. It was an arterial road going to an on-ramp onto the 174. While he is a cyclist, that is a high pedestrian area because it is within maybe a dozen meters of one of our major transit stops. So there are several memorials to the gentleman that died. One is right outside your building here. He is part of the Ghost Bike stuff that's outside, but a memorial is not action. There's also a Ghost Bike to encourage drivers to slow down in the area where he died, but that, again, is not a permanent action, and it's not enough. We need more than memorials. We need a commitment to road redesign. What we did get was paint for the crosswalks and a sign telling pedestrians to yield to cars. If you are introducing a older child to a younger child, you don't tell the youngest child to be gentle. You tell the oldest child to be gentle because they have more responsibility because you're bigger. I'd like you to apply that same idea to road safety. It's not the person that's going to suffer the biggest problems that needs to yield. It's also the drivers. They have a responsibility. Yes, when I do the crosswalks and I see the traffic coming from 100 kilometers down to, well, they're supposed to be down to 50, but they aren't. Whenever I cross, I have a responsibility to yield if I think they can't stop or if I think they haven't seen me. But they have a responsibility to respect the crosswalk and that I have rights on the roads too. This plan does have education to encourage everyone to realize that they have a role, but education isn't going to be enough if we only do it for 4 years. This is going to be a generational issue. In my lifetime, it's taken 30 years to get to the point where drinking and driving is no longer acceptable. We're still at the point where some people think you can have one drink and drive, but it's taken a long time to get to this point. Road safety will take a long time too. This can't be just a 4-year term of council issue, a once and done issue. We'll need to go on for a long time. The other thing I need for you to do is to dream bigger. I need you to dream as big as the parents of the young man that died dreamed when they held him for the first time. They dreamed of the grandchildren they would have, the pride they would have in their son. I need you to dream bigger for all the other people that will have fatal or life-changing accidents on our roads. When I look at some other organizations, their plan is bigger than our plan. The Mothers Against Drunk Driving in the US, they are working for a future of no more victims. Cancer societies don't say we're working to reduce cancer deaths. They talk about a life where no child gets cancer. Those may only be aspirational dreams, but they set the tone for action across those organizations, and I need you to dream as big in road safety. It's not enough just to build new roads that are safer. We're going to have to put millions into retrofitting. Just putting up signs at all these on-ramps across the city will not be enough. There will need to be redesigns to those intersections to make them safer for all the users that use them. Our feeling is it is perfectly acceptable to assume that a child would cycle through their community from their home to a public pool, have a good time, and cycle home. In this case, the young gentleman did not make it home. His 2 fellow friends did, but we could have had 3 dead children just as easily as 1. And that's because we don't have a vision for designing safe streets that looks at streets that we already have and puts in the money we need. So please dream big for all these people that have been injured on our roads. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much. Councillor Ullah.
Thank you for your comments today. I would like to highlight that in the 2020 budget, we have $650,000 going in to completely redesign that intersection to make it safe for vulnerable road users. That's it. Thank you very much.
I understand that. There are several more intersections like it across the city where the same sign has been put up to address the same road pattern. Fixing one road is not fixing a design pattern.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Miranda. Thank you very much for coming. Our next speaker is actually going to present via video. And so Matt's just going to load this up for us. and his name is Travis
Hello,
Crokin.
my name is Travis Crokin, and I wanted to give a brief message on the importance of cycling safety in the city of Ottawa.
You can do that?
I used to be an avid cyclist. I did competitions. I lived on my bike. I didn't drive a car. I was always cycling everywhere. I was a climber. I used to skate all the time. I was very, very active and led a very fulfilling life until a little over 6 years ago, about 6.5 years ago now, I was hit by a car while cycling downtown here in Ottawa. Without getting into the details of the accident, it left me with permanent brain damage, with 2 ribs that were knocked off of my spine. My back was damaged in 5 places. I walk with a cane now and have balance problems because the signal doesn't get to my leg properly the way it should because of the spinal cord damage. And I was also left with a disease called complex regional pain syndrome, which was caused when my central nervous system was damaged in the accident. It's one of the most excruciating issues a human being can deal with, and has completely changed my life. I spent 5 years in very active rehab and recovery, coming back from it. And now I lead my life working, doing what I can to help others, to work for community development, to be the person for others that I needed when I was at my lowest. So I'm trying to take what was a very negative situation and turn it into a positive. I do whatever I can through work with my community associations, through community steering tables, through my writing, through everything that I can do to try to improve people's lives and to try to improve the lives and the city of Ottawa itself. Too often I hear things from developers and from planners saying, well, you know, this cycling concept is not ideal, but it's what we can work with. Not ideal shattered my life. Not ideal left me with crippling chronic pain and fighting every day. I have to wake up every day and choose to fight, to face that day, to go through what is one of the reasons why I do my community development work, because I can't do very much for myself anymore, but I do what I can to help others so that they don't have to suffer and go through things that I'm going through. It's really true that when they say you don't know what you don't know. And for me, I can say that I didn't know that complex regional pain syndrome existed. I didn't realize that a person could live with the level of pain that I live with on a daily basis. And there's nothing I wouldn't give to go back and change what happened, but it has happened to me, and it's happened to other people. There's people that have died, people are losing their lives, people are having their lives shattered. This is something that needs to be taken seriously. This is something that needs to be changed. We need to improve cycling infrastructure in the city. We need to take it seriously, and we need to ensure that everybody, doesn't matter what they're riding or what they're driving, we all get home safe at the end of the day. And we have to stop using lines and words like, well, it's not ideal. So please, my plea to you is make a difference, make it better. Take into account the fact that these are not cyclists, which I'm no longer, because I can no longer ride a bike. And these people are not cyclists. They're human beings. They're people trying to get home at the end of the day. So stop looking at things as a cyclist driver issue and look at it as a human issue, a family issue, that everybody in the city deserves to get home safe to their families at the end of the day. Thank you. Hello, my name is Travis Crokin, and I wanted to give a brief message on the importance of cycling safety.
So, thank you very much. Obviously, we can't ask Travis any questions. The next speaker is John Woodhouse, who I did see, I think. Oh, yes, yeah. Thanks, John. You've got 5 minutes.
Okay. I do. Okay, yeah. Great. Okay, my name is John Woodhouse. I'm here to read a letter I was sent to every individual on this committee, since it didn't go through Kelly. I just want to make sure that it does get on the public record. Okay. Maybe if I take my glasses off, I'll be able to see. Well, worry. Okay. To Chair Stephen Blay and members of the Transportation Committee from Ottawa Disability Coalition, Strategic Road Safety Action Plan. The Ottawa Disability Coalition supports equity and independent living of all persons with disabilities. Our mission is to build a community in which persons with disabilities have equitable access to the same opportunities as every other citizen in the city. In general, we support the action plan, but wish to bring the committee's attention to the following items. One, elimination of bag buttons could mean the elimination of the audible signal. Some people with vision loss depend upon to safely cross the street. Number two, a U.S. study has concluded that wheelchair users have a higher risk of vehicle collisions than able-bodied pedestrians. It is important to know as the experience in the Ottawa area is the same. We therefore recommend that the traffic injury report contains statistics on wheelchair and scooter use. Number three, solutions are needed to mitigate the outcome of drivers turning right but looking left, therefore putting pedestrians at risk. 4, pedestrians crossing at intersections where drivers encounter yield signs are at risk, as the pedestrian is a stationary wheelchair or scooter user, as drivers do not register them as road crossers. Watch for pedestrians signage may help. And the final one, number 5, road safety audits are an excellent idea, and it is suggested that a tool Ottawa could use to judge street safety, to judge road safety be developed and shared with the public. Ottawa's commitment to improving the pedestrian infrastructure so that persons with disabilities have equitable access is apparent in the increase of time traffic lights permit pedestrians to cross the road. Smoother curb cuts, improved sidewalk maintenance, and the ability to report hazards of inaccessibility by calling 311 the road safety plan provides another vehicle to build on this commitment. Thank you for your attention. That's all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woodhouse. Are there any questions? No? Seeing none, then we'll move to our next delegation. Elaine McGregor, are you here? No. Barbara Greenberg?
Thanks, Barbara. You have 5 minutes, and I'll give you a little wave. There's about 30 seconds left.
Thanks. So greetings, and thank you for the opportunity to comment on the new Road Safety Action Plan. I am here today representing Bike Ottawa, which advocates for the safe cycling in our city. We believe that biking is for people of all ages and abilities and should be encouraged throughout the year, as it leads to a more livable and vibrant city. Over the past 35 years, we have worked closely with staff and councillors in each and every ward on the city's policies, plans, and programs. Our work supports the city's priorities for active, sustainable transportation, particularly in response to the climate emergency. We welcome the third iteration of the city's Road Safety Action Plan. We are pleased that the city is committed to implementing a systematic approach to road safety. Human life and health should take priority over traffic mobility. Human error shouldn't result in the loss of life or life-changing injury. Decision makers are critical in the role of the safety of all road users. The development of a safety training course and an evaluation grid that will help decision makers assess any project from a safety perspective is welcome because it will demand all road projects be seen through a safety lens. At the same time, Bike Ottawa is of the view that this action plan does not go nearly far enough. The first Road Safety Action Plan launched in about 17 years ago, and we are still averaging 24 fatalities and 124 major injuries each year. We can and should do much more and much better. The report highlights the fundamental truth about road safety in our society. Our road network has been designed to facilitate motor vehicles to travel at high speeds, regardless of what road limit signs say. Brent Todarian, a highly renowned practitioner in urbanism, city planning, and urban design, is constantly reminding us the truth about a city's aspirations isn't found in its vision, it's found in its budget. While we acknowledge that cycling has been incorporated into major projects such as Baseline, Montreal Road, Albert and Slater, and even the Strandherd widening, people on bikes constantly face dangerous cities all over the city. The city has declared a climate emergency. Cycling can help us curb this emergency if we have more safe, protected lanes for people to use. Safe, protected lanes bring out more people on bikes. Induced demand works both ways. Build it, and we will use it. The budget for the Road Safety Action Plan is more business as usual. It isn't taking any ambitious actions to accelerate progress on building a livable and bike-friendly city. This is what Bike Ottawa has been asking for years. We think the city has good plans and good intentions, but we want to see those excellent plans brought to life and much sooner. The Road Safety Action Plan comes at this point with what appears to be one-time funding, and the city does not appear to be on the hook for future budgets. We are always discussing the vast size of Ottawa. We need to reflect this size within the budgeting for the Road Safety Action Plan. What are we building? What will $4 million translate to in protected intersections? What does it cost to replace painted bicycle lanes and floating lanes with actual protected barriers? What will the budget get us in terms of safety? To make our streets safer for every road user, every person in a car, on a bus, on a bike, walking or rolling, we all benefit from the implementation of the Road Safety Action Plan. But the budget, your budget, must reflect the concrete changes that need to be made. We urge you to put your budget where your vision is. Be bold, make change, be leaders in safe streets for everyone. Lives are depending on it. We look forward to continuing our partnership with council members and staff across every ward to building this vision in real and meaningful ways for people of this great city. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. If you have questions, I'm happy to try to respond.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for your presentation. Councillor Leeper has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Barbara, I'm going to support the road safety action plan that is being brought forward today. This council has determined that 3% is the tax limit that we're going to allow, and within that, I think the road safety action plan makes a gesture towards improving safety on our roads. In future years, I hope that we'll find the budget to do more. One of the things that rankles with respect to this plan is the users of our roads are intended to use the roads as designed. That comes out in Vision Zero, that comes out in the safe systems approach that we've described in this report, that the success of our safety plans depends on users using the facilities as designed. On Island Park Drive, that means that in order for cyclists to be safe, drivers have to stay on one side of a painted line, and cyclists have to stay on the other side of a painted line. Do you feel we're properly designing our roads to be safe so that we can rely on users to use the facilities as designed?
At this point, I would say no. There are some great examples of where road design has been done that keep people separated and keep them safe, and I think the design works for the most part. I'm thinking of Main Street, but even Main Street has some gaps. So when I bike Main Street, I use the road in the way that it is designed. I will be in the cycle lane, in the cycle track, but there's missing links where I then get spit out into the live lane with drivers. And this becomes confusing for everyone, because why am I suddenly appearing? Well, it's because it ended and I am suddenly in the lane with them. I think there's lots of great examples all over the world of where cities are doing things that we can be looking at. But we need a lot more work. The famous line is, paint isn't infrastructure. Paint is just paint. It fades. It can be easily driven over. It can be ignored. It can be parked in. So if you're trying to use the painted lane as a person on a bike, that's great. It's nice that it's even there, but it means nothing at the end of the day. And even studies show that sometimes a painted line, not even sometimes, studies show that painted lines actually make the street less safe for people on bikes, because you get less passing room, because the line there is seen as, you know, a safe distance, where really it should be a meter. And because the painted line is there, we don't get enough room when passing. You can see that on Pretoria Bridge, where you have a painted cycle lane, but the driver traffic is right beside you. Should they accidentally swerve, they're inches within hitting you.
Yep. One of the things that does strike me about the statistics that staff gave us, though, is that I think 61% of the FMIs over the 4-year period or 5-year period that was studied involved some sort of aggressive, we're not using aggressive anymore, high-risk behaviors. What about the potential for simply putting a lot more money into enforcement to deal with high-risk driving behaviors as a low-cost way to save more lives?
It's not enough. The point of Vision Zero or Safe Street, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, we can have a separate chat about that, but designing the road so that you're separated allows for distance between anyone who wants to engage in any kind of high-risk behavior. So if it's a driver that is, if you're separated, then you're protected. When you're beside a driver in a painted bike lane, you have no separation. So if that person decides to turn their wheel at a split-second notice, you have no buffer. And there are a lot of high-risk drivers around, and it would be, the ideal situation is to separate everyone into their own spaces. You know, I want to be away from them as much as they see me as in their way, if we're sharing a space.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dudas has a question.
Great, thank you, Barbara, for being here. We often focus a lot on existing infrastructure, and most certainly there's room for improvement in that respect. There is a lot of new development happening in suburbs, in rural areas that is taking place. What is Bike Ottawa's role in terms of working through those public consultations, or with councillors' offices, or with city staff, to see that your vision for bike infrastructure is implemented in those newly built opportunities?
So often people will approach us for to review things, for input. Oftentimes, because we try to stay abreast of what is happening in terms of building, we will. We're always commenting, we're trying to send comments about what missing gaps there might be, or potentials for conflict that we see from a biking perspective. In the past, I think we're a volunteer organization, so we do the best that we can to stay on top of what is being built and to offer suggestions or for improvements. And in some cases, because we often have relationships with councillors and things like that, they might approach us and say, this is what is happening, do you mind commenting on it, for feedback?
Because I know in my ward, we tragically had a fatality on a rural road that was never meant to have residential build up around it on Renault Road this past year. And, you know, we're seeing that a lot of the suburbs have now taken over former rural roads, and we haven't been able to keep pace with that infrastructure. I did have a member of Bike Ottawa come out and provide phenomenal feedback. We're looking at how to implement that with the infrastructure that is had. However, there's been other consultations I've had where I've certainly invited the bike community. I would love to get their input and really help turn the tide in terms of social acceptance of this kind of thing. And I think that it would be very important for you to maybe make that time to come out to maybe suburban wards and be part of that consultation, because, you know, when I'm trying to advocate for bike lanes on, say, Belcourt, it's very hard to be one voice in many when not having that many people. And I think too, you know, when we're talking about the extension of Brian Coburn and the options that are on the table, to have Bike Ottawa have, an opportunity to be briefed on what's available and have their say, which I think will come into the road audit opportunities as well too. So I'm just saying the invitation's always open for any of the projects in my ward, but you had mentioned you represent or represented or involved in each and every ward, and I think there's a lot of benefit to getting into projects before they even shovels in the ground, as opposed to even just the existing infrastructure. So
I think that, excuse me, actually discussions about urban versus suburban sort of spread in our group have been happening, because we've been watching, you know, and hearing from people who are in more suburban settings, more rural areas, discussing these safety things, especially in light of, you know, death and things like that on the roads. And we are seeing that it's not just, you know, it's not just people that are in the urban center, it's everyone that is concerned. And so I would say that, you know, we would welcome opportunities to be involved and to provide feedback. And honestly, in that sense, it would just be a quick email. This is happening, and we'll send somebody, you know.
Well, and I think it's important we all recognize when we're traveling through our city, no matter what route we're taking,
Councillor,
there is no
we should
rural.
really stick to questions, please, okay? Yeah.
Good, thank
We can talk more.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for coming out this morning.
Thank you.
Just for members of the committee, Alain McGregor had signed up to speak, but is unable to attend, but there is a submission in the Common Drive if you're interested in taking a look at it. The next speaker is Ward Vershayev. I hope I got that right. Thanks very much, Ward. Do you have a presentation you need up on the screen, or?
I have it here.
Okay.
So, sorry, this is my first time speaking at one of these things. So this issue has a very personal impact on myself. A month ago, I was hit by a car that decided to turn right into an active bike lane without warning. And since then, crossing streets has been quite horrifying for me. I'm always really terrified that a car will be turning right without properly looking. I will say that this city has been better than others when it comes to cycling progress. And while it is great, sometimes it does feel like organizers are just building bike lanes to check off boxes, and there's a difference between safe cycling infrastructure and cycling infrastructure. Many super sharrows, like the ones that are coming in on Elgin and on Queen Street, while they are a great idea, it is not a safe design. This past summer, I was honked at, swerved, and harassed by a driver on Queen Street, and I have never ever gone back to that street just because I don't feel safe, and I doubt I will go to Elgin as a result. There is another place of concern for me, and that is the bridge on Bronson Avenue. While the paint and the separation is great, I do witness almost daily drivers who will decide to go over that painted area or into the bike lane to pass all the cars backed up going into the city, especially during rush hour. This happened to me yesterday twice while crossing the bridge. This is also concerning for me because there are numerous Carleton students who are very new to the city and who don't know the ways of the roads yet that use this bridge when coming to and from class. And a lot of them are using this bridge to get to Holmwood or using the Bank Street Bridge, which also has a Sharrow design, which is quite daunting to go over. While the paint is, like I said, the paint is great and there are separated bike lanes on Bronson, they are spotted and they do disappear as well when in the right turn lane at Carleton. One of the first few days that I was biking in Ottawa, I was using that bike lane in between the right turn lane and the lanes going straight on Bronson, and all of a sudden OC Transpo bus was mere inches from my right side, which terrified me, and I almost jumped into the through traffic in the lane over. So I just think that when we are looking at this road safety action plan, we need to consider these new users to the city who don't know what is safe, or where is safe and where is not safe, and how to go about using the roads, especially in that area crossing north into Centertown, into the Glebe. There are only two crossings, and that's the Bronson and the Bank Street bridges, and as well in southern Ottawa, when we look at Hogsback and we look at that side of the city, I know a lot of my teammates who like to bike to practice early in the morning frequently come in saying that they almost got hit this morning and that they're just waiting. I myself told the paramedics last month when I was in the ambulance, I was like, I'm not surprised it happened. I knew it was going to happen eventually. So my main concern is that we need to think about these new road users who aren't used to the streets yet when we're developing this plan.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Are there any questions for Ward? Councillor Kavanagh, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for coming out today, because it's very painful, obviously, to share that experience, and I know it firsthand. And not in terms of being injured, but every time I go out on my bike, people say to me, "Take care, we're worried about you," and yet it should be a normal form of transportation, and I shouldn't have to have special messages to me or to you to be safe. And obviously, some of the experiences you have, like on Queen Street, I know what you're talking about. So I want to thank you for that. If you have any suggestions, what would you give as a first one in terms of particular situations?
I think for the Bronson Bridge, going into downtown, the bike lane on the side of the street ends and all of a sudden reappears in between the lane to turn onto Queen Elizabeth Drive, I believe it is.
I know where it is. Yeah.
That in itself, every time I have to cross over, that's where I almost get hit by by other cars. So I'm in business. I'm not in urban design. So just finding a way to keep cyclists to the side and safe and separated till at least Holmwood, because that's where most of them turn off to take side streets to get downtown. I don't know how you would go about that. It's just an area that I'm concerned with.
Thank you.
Councillor Bernard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you for being here. I've taken notes of some of the intersections you've mentioned, and we have that. I've been working with staff on the Bank Street Bridge. We expect something to come forward, I'm hoping, in the new year to try to make that safer. In all of these things, the problem is always we get these analysis of traffic flow, and then that's compared against the safety of users, of vulnerable road users. And so Bronson in particular will get redone at some point, but will it get redone in a way that is safer than it is now? That's the question that we battle with here all the time. So I think this road safety action plan, I'm hoping there's some movement there when we redo these things. But anyways, thanks for the allowing me to just comment, Chair, on some of the areas in my ward that Ward mentioned. Thank you for being here. And Phil Landry beside you there is one of the guys, and Krista and Rob, that definitely should get your emails as well as councillors, because they're folks that can help us implement these changes. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ward, for coming out and sharing your story and your perspective. Appreciate it. The next speaker is Trevor Hache.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Transportation Committee. I live in Canada South, and listening to Teresa and Ward share their story, it made me think about trying to bike on Terry Fox Drive, where there is a painted bike lane, which provides zero protection to me. But sometimes I'll try to bike in that suburban community from the south to the north and back. My in-laws live in Canada North. And I'm worried about the world my kids are inheriting with the climate crisis that we're responsible for and not doing enough to prevent. So I try to do my part when I can, but it literally is taking your life in your own hands in many areas of Ottawa. And it's a shame that this is currently the case, and I think the city needs to do better. And while I appreciate that there's been an improvement in the draft that I saw a couple months ago, in which there basically wasn't a commitment to reduce by any percentage the number of fatalities on our road. I think that the percentage that now is being proposed doesn't go far enough, fast enough. So that's what I'm hoping you can do, is go further much faster, recognizing that lives are at stake. So I would urge you to adopt Vision Zero immediately, to implement safer streets using really affordable things such as pop-ups that can be implemented with things like pylons. In many places of Ottawa, it'd be much better than just some paint. A lot of what I've heard Chair Blais say in the media is with regard to funding challenges. And I know that you all struggle with that, and we're going to be discussing the budget later, but pylons actually aren't that expensive. And cities around the world are implementing these temporary measures before more significant funding can be found. So I'd urge the city to create a network of safe cycling infrastructure in every ward within the urban boundary area. That cycling infrastructure could be created with things such as pylons initially. We could certainly partner with the city to implement pop-up projects across Ottawa, and we stand willing and able to help. I want to voice support for 30-kilometer-an-hour streets now. We should be implementing that, as other cities across Canada are doing. Certainly want to voice support for the idea that we should be prioritizing safe streets instead of road widenings designed to give more road space to people driving cars and trucks. The budget implications of road widenings are massive, and they do nothing to really curb congestion. So we know that if we can get more people on bikes, it will make everybody's commute better, and so that should be the priority. I'd also urge the city to rigorously apply the equity and inclusion lens to its decision-making with regard to where and when improvements are implemented. So Michelle shared earlier about how low-income families that have kids are more likely to experience road injuries or fatalities than families with higher incomes. And that's an inequity. It can be addressed simply by prioritizing addressing it. So what that means is you should prioritize spending in Ottawa's lower income neighborhoods that have poor walkability. Groups like the Ottawa Neighborhood Study can provide you with a list of where those 15 neighborhoods are. I could also do so. I'd also urge you to commit to achieving Vision Zero by 2030. That type of a goal seems very smart in that it's specific, it's measurable, you can assign people the responsibility to achieve it, it's realistic, and it's time-related. Now, earlier this year, I helped to organize a couple vigils and rolls for justice, what we called them, after there were multiple people killed on the City of Ottawa's unsafe streets. And it's very awful that people are still being killed, and it's very sad to have to spend time organizing vigils and rallies for the type of action that you all say you're committed to. So now is an opportunity to improve what is before you now. I think, the Ottawa Road Safety Action Plan as presented today is a good first step. It doesn't go far enough. It doesn't go fast enough. And so I would urge you all to go further, go faster. And I think supporting Councillor Menard's motion would be a good first step, and I'd urge you all to vote in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Ulof, please.
Just very briefly, would you support a road widening project if it was to install a dedicated bus lane or cycling infrastructure?
I think there could possibly be a specific example looked at with regard to that. Certainly, more bus-only lanes on existing roads would be welcomed. Safe cycling infrastructure would be welcomed in more places of the city. I think Ottawa could learn from other jurisdictions which are basically saying, we're going to create a network of bus-only lanes on existing roads, and while we're at it, we're going to say that cars are no longer able to go on those roads. Those roads are strictly for public transit vehicles, pedestrians, and cyclists. If there was a network citywide with that type of a design, you wouldn't necessarily have to widen an existing road to achieve that. You could save money in this constrained budget environment that is self-imposed. But we're living in that self-imposed budget constraint. So I think if you have a specific example, certainly I live in the west end of Ottawa, and there was a road widening that occurred through a greenbelt area that has species at risk throughout it. And that wasn't something I was supportive of. So I know there's a lot of people in the east that want something similar to occur through the greenbelt. So happy to talk about specifics, but that'd be my general answer.
Thanks very much. Are there any other questions? Seeing none. And for the record, the proposal in the east is actually the most environmentally friendly and includes an HOV lane and cycling facilities. So with that, we will go to, there are no other speakers. We will go to questions to staff. Councillor Fleury is first. And just to remind everyone, we have those motions in addition to the report. Let's deal with it all at once, please, and then we'll get to voting when everyone's done.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Because this is questions, comments, I'll begin with my comments. I will be supporting both motions, and I'll ask as for a friendly amendment on Jeff's motion to include the Byron Market, just so that we're clear on the expectation to the residential. So you're okay with that as a friendly amendment. Aside from Councillor El-Shantiri, I think many of us have been at the table for many years. We've lived through the Complete Streets discussions years ago. And I sort of come across it when we pass these reports and these policies, how important they are to set a tone and an objective. Yet, the applicability of these policies afterwards gets complex. And that's where I'd love to hear from staff as to the Road Safety Action Plan has a kind of a fundamental in place that needs to tie into infrastructure services, that needs to tie into the enforcement arm through Ottawa Police, that needs to tie into winter operations and the review of MQS. How is the team, beyond what's presented in the plan, having the, I don't like to use the word authority, but how does it ingrain these committee objectives and these goals deeper in the organization so that every member, as we redo a street, that the project manager and that the community has that in place, that the review of the winter maintenance from an accessibility point of view and from a safety point of view also be integrated, and then in spots where we have existing issues that we have proper enforcement. How does that all tie in to what's presented to committee today?
Well, one of the recommendations moving forward, Councillor, is if you remember the governance slide with regards to the steering committee setting the high-level overview of the program, and that includes representation at the senior level from not only transportation services but Ottawa Public Health, with the medical officer of health being at the table. It includes Deputy Chief Steve Bell and Superintendent Joan McKenna at the table. So high-level decision makers from all the participating departments are actually on the steering committee. And our goal is to make sure that all of the participating departments are held accountable for the new plan. And so that would be one way. And at the staff level, so that next layer down of staff, we plan to set up the working group once again, made up of all of those departments, including our colleagues at Infrastructure Services, and with the goal of monitoring our progress throughout and identifying gaps in accountability, gaps in implementation at a very, very early stage, and reporting up to senior management to make sure that those gaps are erased. So by adopting the plan and the strategic kind of framework or the governance structure, you're actually asking us to make sure that we keep our peers accountable and keep senior leadership up to speed on where those gaps are occurring. So our hope as staff is we will remove some of those obvious scenarios that you've spoken about.
Okay, thank you. In terms of funding of some of the initiatives, there's the goal, there's the $4 million goal and so on, but yesterday I asked a question at FEDCO as it relates to the red light cameras. I believe just offhand, I think it's 12 million that we're expecting from revenue. You don't need to, I'm not specific on the amount here, but are we able to use some of those revenue sources through red light cameras and so on to fund infrastructure services that would fix the issue in the first place? Because a lot of the elements that we're confronting are historic designs that were wider than expected, and now we're, putting signs and trying to do traffic calming. I see that all the time, and no one's guilty yet everyone is in some way. So love to hear from you as to can we use those sorts of pockets? Which other funds should we be looking at to fund the fundamentals, which is proper infrastructure build out?
So I can talk about moving forward in terms of what the plan and the report talks to. May I see Wendy Stevenson's there? Maybe she can talk about sort of the historical of where we are today. But moving forward, any funds that come in through automated enforcement, through the automated license plate recorder, the school bus camera, the red light camera after 2020, any of those funds will be reallocated to road safety. We're also looking at potential other sources of automated enforcement. We have issues with stop signs. We have issues with bus lane compliance. So those are the kind of things that we're going to look moving forward. So anything that's tied to that would be put into the bucket, and depending on how much revenue we receive, we would then put that towards road safety. Because the goal of this revenue is to reinvest it into that road safety bucket.
Okay, that's good to hear going forward what the plans are. I will echo the sentiment of many of the speakers, which is I wish we had come out with an aspirational goal, something that we aspire that might be in 10 years we'll get there, a bit like the AODA. AODA was passed, and it's not like tomorrow it was resolved. We every year spend a bit of money to make all of our property compliance, and then the province set a target year. I wish that from this report we would be aspirational to 0 injuries, because when we went out and provided a number, then that became, is that the right number, and how do we get there, and how expensive that would be. I would have preferred if the goal was how do we get to zero? And yes, here's our next 3 years, here's the plan. I think committee and the community the tone would have changed to something like, yes, thank you for having a goal that's lofty, that's hard to get, and yet it's important to have metrics and achievable action plans so that we can get there. That's a comment that, you know, I wish we had started there, and hopefully with the funding stream that you're talking about, we can be aggressive in those key areas that need improvements.
Thanks very much. And just before we go to the next speaker, just to provide some context for people, Sweden, which is often referred to as the originator of Vision Zero and held up as one of the benchmarks, while they have Vision Zero, their goal for fatalities in 2020 was actually 220. So every jurisdiction has incremental goals, and Ottawa is no different. The next speaker is Councillor Hubley. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Councillor Blais, Chair. Thank you. A couple of quick questions on the plan, and then talk to the motion. Earlier in the presentation, you said you're going to train all staff who make decisions about roads on road safety. I would think anybody that's working for the city that has that power and responsibility knows something about road safety. So what's the difference here? The training, like you're hiring high-priced help to help you with this already. Are we taking them in and they're not trained on road safety? That would be a concern.
Staff that are designing and planning the roads have very specific training in the fields in which they're performing their jobs. Transportation planners have different training than a transportation engineer. Traffic engineer who deals with traffic signals has different training than an engineer who specializes in road safety.
But wouldn't they all have training in road safety? Like, I'm hoping the person that's planning and designing the roads are doing it so that it's a safe matter for all users.
They're trained to follow the guidelines, follow the design standards and things like that as part of their engineering training or their planning training. But road safety is a specific branch of civil engineering, let's say. And there's a lot more emphasis on how the human factors side of things impact a design choice, right? So how will somebody use the network from a pedestrian's perspective, a cyclist's perspective, or a driver's perspective? So there's a lot of emphasis on that. There's a lot of emphasis on understanding the different types of things that might lead to certain types of collisions as well. So it's a little bit different. It's more of an in-depth understanding of road safety as opposed to how to design something to meet standards, which has safety built into it already, but just trying to look at it from a different perspective to understand how the different users are using it as well. So it's a little bit different, and that's what we're going to be focusing on as part of the road safety.
So would that have helped us, like earlier, as one of the groups made a presentation, said that the complete street on Main Street that was done isn't safe, that they have to go back out into the roads. So did we design that road unsafe and build it unsafe?
No, we don't design roads unsafe. All our roads are safe. We follow our standards. I think the comment is we have challenges where there's an endpoint, especially we're sort of at the startup of rebuilding our city to make it more sustainable. So if you look back 20, 30 years ago, the focus was, you know, getting vehicles from A to B. Over the time, we started with bike lanes. That was sort of the best design back in the 90s. And since that, we've evolved to the cycle tracks. So as part of our, you know, and there was a slide that talked about sort of the planning principles. So we brought forward an arterial guideline that talks about any new arterials that are being rebuilt will have cycle tracks on them. They'll have segregated facilities. But that occurs when new roads are being built or when roads are being redeveloped. So we've seen Main Street, which was redeveloped. We've seen Churchill, which was rebuilt. So as time goes on those major streets, anywhere in the city, so it could be out on Terry Fox when that road gets rebuilt, but it doesn't happen overnight. But we put in plans and standards. The Building Better Subdivision is another example of where we want to design the roads so that when the road gets built, we're not, our staff aren't out there a week later dealing with traffic problems, because that shouldn't happen. So what's being recommended, and there's a recommendation here about designing the roads to 30 kilometers an hour on all new developed roads or new reconstructed roads, is so that we create that environment so that vehicles travel at those speeds. And that's the main focus, because if we can do that, that'll go a long way to reduce fatalities and serious injuries.
I want to come back to that later in the discussion around the 30K roads, but moving on with this piece. Another recommendation here for the funding is you want to develop guidelines and audit large and unconventional road projects in the planning and design phases. Audit's a big word, and audits can take a long time. What definition of audit are you using, and what's the impact on these projects for your involvement in there from that view, insofar as their timelines and everything?
The road safety audit is a process that's been used in road safety programs around the world. We will be following the guidance provided in the Transportation Association of Canada's road safety audit guideline.
Don't you do that now, though? Like, this is why I'm wondering why I'm seeing this as new information. I would have thought that all this is already being done.
We do road safety audits on an ad hoc basis from time to time, for sure. But this would be more to develop a proactive approach to identifying locations or construction projects that would benefit from a road safety audit. So right now, it would be more, if something is brought up, then we might do a road safety audit on the project, but this would be more of a proactive approach to identifying those projects before they start, pretty much.
And one of the concerns, as you've probably heard, is like a road project can take years before anybody actually puts shovels in the ground. So I'm asking, if you're going to do a new process, how much time would get added to that project?
There shouldn't be a lot of added time to the project itself. So an auditor can go in and look at a project in the planning stage or in the preliminary design or in the detailed design or all three. But it's usually part of the design process and the timelines that are associated with the design. It doesn't add a significant amount of time to an overall project.
Okay, and a question on something I saw in there, pedestrian intervals. What's that? What are we talking about?
You mean the leading pedestrian intervals?
Well, it says, one of the lines here, it says, implement leading pedestrian intervals near schools and in the central business district.
Yeah, so what that is when normally at our traffic lights, when the light turns green and the walk comes up at the same time. So leading pedestrian is the walk would come up and the light would still stay red for vehicles, and normally we put that in for 5 seconds. So we've got about 100 locations in the city, and so for 2020, what we wanted to do is focus where we have the greatest number of pedestrians, so that's why we picked the central business district, and then the other was also tied to schools where we have the most vulnerable users. So we're going to...
So the schools will be citywide?
Yes, schools will be citywide. So it's to proactively go out, because in the past we've just, sort of waited for people to deal with that. So as part of our resource plan, we're asking for one person to work in our traffic signal area that would be proactively going out to those schools and within the core for 2020 to identify those locations where it would meet the criteria to put those in, because safety studies have shown that that by adding that in as an advance warning, it does reduce collisions and severe collisions with pedestrians.
Thank you for the explanation. Now, finally, turning to the 30K piece, 30 kilometer per hour roads. This year, I believe, is when we launched like pilots on this. I know in my area, for example, we identified some streets to put the 30K in. My understanding is your people will go in and actually do measures to see what the compliance rate is, because one of the things I've always read in reports about transportation planning and heard from you and others in staff is the sign doesn't make a difference. It's the design of the road. So right now, because we're talking about photo radar and at the same time talking about 30-kilometer streets, what I'm hearing from a lot of residents, okay, you're just setting us up for a big cash grab here. So what's the plan here? Like, we have a pilot, but now I'm hearing like if some of these motions get approved today, you want to move from the pilot right to an implementation of 30K on all the residential streets as they get brought on?
I think the idea, and we brought forward our policy on 30K, this was last year or the year before, and the intent is we want to ensure that when we sign a road at 30 kilometers an hour or 40 kilometers or 50 kilometers, that the vehicles are traveling at that speed. Because we also have a lot of data that shows, especially when we had a lot of streets at 40, when it used to be 50, the speeds don't change. So it becomes challenging in terms of putting up a sign that says 30, the road's wide, or there's, and the operating speeds are in the 40s, and then we start getting complaints from people saying, well, you got to fix this because the speed limit's 30. So we put in a process to ensure that if we were to sign a road 30, we get close to 30. So as part of the review for this report, we were asked to look in the sort of the core, what would need to be done. When we do put 30 kilometers an hour, we do narrow the lanes with paint. So that's sort of the first step. Where we would ultimately want to be is we actually rebuild the road so that people are traveling through that. And the recommendation in the report that talks to any new road being rebuilt or any new road that's just a new road, we design those for 30, so the operating speeds are 30, so that's where we want to get to.
And we'll go in and retrofit old streets? Like,
we would, if
streets that were built in the 90s, for example, to me, are built like highways. Like, the cars are just flying down it. So we've worked together on doing some redesigns of those streets when the opportunity came up to bring that speed down. But for us to go in on those roads today and put up 30K signs, there'll be no compliance.
No, and we wouldn't, that's not the policy that the council's approved in terms from that perspective, but it's to then put in measures, what can we do? So from our perspective, the paint is the first step, and a lot of the streets where we do that, the speeds are in the high 30s, low 40s, so we're not that far away. But ultimately, we'd want to rebuild that. So that's where I know, working with Councilor Menard, there's 3 or 4 streets in his ward that are getting rebuilt next year, and we're going to be putting in a plan so that you've got speed humps, you've got raised intersections, you've got narrowings at intersections to create that environment that people will travel at that speed. So we would do that more on a moving forward basis through the reconstruction, because that's where you really get the biggest bang for your buck, because to go in and do a retrofit without any reconstruction going on, I know when we looked at the area as part of this response, it was somewhere between $130 million and $450 million to do that.
Okay, my final question is to do with Councillor Leeper's motion, where it says staff will develop a plan within existing budgets for the gradual implementation of the 30K. What kind of money are we looking at? Because when I read that terminology, develop within existing budgets, that means take money out of other projects or other worthwhile initiatives underway and move it into this. So what kind of money are we talking about that? Like, will projects be at risk because of this?
Well, the high-level review that we've done, especially just for the sort of the downtown sort of inner city areas, is between 135 and 450, and that was basically looking at all the number of streets, looking, do we have to reduce the road by 1 meter, by 2 meters? So I think the intent here is to do a more in-depth review in terms of narrowing that cost and coming forward with potential options as to how you might fund this. So it's not to say, I don't think the intent is to take away from existing programs, because there are, the programs that are in place are being done for specific issues, either through cycling, pedestrians, intersection modifications, and things like that. So.
Okay, sorry, Chair, one last piece. Like, my concern with this motion, with the 30K, Councillor Leeper's motion, is you just started the pilot. I'm waiting to see the results of it. So I'm a little concerned with moving too fast on this, but if this motion is just to do the report, then as long as we put something in there about getting the feedback from the pilot, and I'm going to assume you're going to want at least a year's worth of data there from last year to whatever the anniversary is for it. Would that not make sense to have some data from the pilot to do this?
Yeah, we're in the process. We've identified a few areas where we've put 30 kilometers an hour, so I believe we were collecting speed, if not this year, it'll be early next year. We do have all the before data. I know there was a couple in Councilman R's ward we did. But again, that was just putting the signs up, right? I think the intent is ultimately is to build it so that vehicles are traveling at that 30 kilometers an hour, because that's really how it'll be effective, because just putting up a sign, like you said, especially on wide roads, isn't really going to make a difference.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And just supplementary to something Councillor Hubley asked, so Mr. Landry, is your reading of the report that of the motion on 30 kilometers an hour, if approved, committee is recommending that all the streets within the core area become 30 kilometers an hour, and we're directing you to implement it? Or is your reading of the motion to develop a report with recommendations to do that and how you would implement it?
Well, I read it as it's develop a plan. So we're going to come up with a plan. In terms of how we report back, we can come back to committee with that plan on how we would do it and what the cost would be. And there might be different options in terms of how fast.
But the streets would only be converted to 30 upon the adoption of that plan.
Sorry?
But your understanding is to develop a plan and then the streets would only be converted to 30 upon the adoption of the plan.
Well, that would be up to council to decide in terms of...
I understand that. I'm asking you how you as staff are interpreting the motion as written.
Well, the motion right now, I don't think is to go out and start putting 30Ks everywhere.
Okay.
I think it's to come up with a plan and come back and then, because there's going to be a cost implication, because we also looked, you know, if you just put the signs up without any modifications, you're talking about $600,000. So we don't have those funds. So I think the intent is to come back with a series of options on how you could do things, and then also what the cost would be, and then we would follow council's direction.
I'm sorry, I've heard two different things. You said you think the motion is directing you to make them 30, but then you want to come back with a plan on how to do it. Those two seem to be in conflict.
Okay,
Either we're making them 30 or we're asking for a report on how to do it.
I think it's a plan on how you would do it. That's my understanding of the motion. It's not to make it 30.
What you're thinking? Yeah, okay. The next speaker is Councillor Egley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to start by thanking staff. This is a project that started last term when I was chairing this committee, and I know how much work went into this. This is probably the toughest file in the city. It's a balancing of funding, priorities, safety, geography, how to educate people. There's so many moving parts. So I want to thank you for the work that you've done in putting this together and creating, I think, a very fulsome group of stakeholders to help you put this plan forward today. I want to sort of get to the nub of what I think, though, the concern or the issue was raised by a number of the delegations. You have the number of 20%. Can you maybe give some backup, some background to the committee as to how 20% was arrived at?
So, Councillor, just to clarify, I guess, through the chair to you, where the target actually came from is, as staff, we had proposed a number of different ideas to the community stakeholders. And so the previous iteration of the plan, the goal was to reach 10% reduction over that 5-year period. We made it to 14. On a high level. So we were quite happy to see that kind of progress. We then felt with the investment, the additional $4 million in 2020, and eventually the onboarding of all the automated enforcement revenue, we felt that going for higher than 14 would be a very achievable mark to start building that forward momentum towards zero. So in consultation with the stakeholders at the last session, they did encourage us to set a goal that was achievable, that we could measure, and that hopefully as staff we would achieve through all the different interventions. So that's where we landed on 20%. Yeah, as a quick nutshell. So it was in consultation with our community partners, and also as discussions as staff as to what we felt was reasonable to put forward for consideration by committee.
So the impetus to actually put a number on this, as opposed to going with your you know, the tagline, if you will, think safety, act safety, which would have said, we care about the road conditions, we care about what's happening to people on the roads, and we're going to do everything we can to minimize the negative impact. The stakeholder group said, we want you to put a number on that. Is that what you're saying?
They provided us with that direction and that support, is that they wanted to see firm numbers in place.
Okay. And I want to go back to the funding, because the other piece that we've heard is this is a one-time funding boost. What happens after that? As I read the report and the presentation, that's not the case. That we have all sorts of speed enforcement pieces coming on stream. That's going to create a revenue source for the city, and that revenue source from well, I think you said spring of 2020 is when the earliest we can see that, and then that revenue stream is going to continue to fund this program going through this term of council. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so we know what the number is now for the one-time boost, if you will, in this particular budget year. Do we have a sense of what you're going to be able to achieve once the cameras are in place starting next year?
Not at this point. That's why we want to do this pilot with the automated enforcement. And so the plan was to, you know, we've identified 8 locations. We're in the process of installing the cameras at those locations. And then we would learn, because one of the things in terms of what we've read and seen in other jurisdictions is your number of tickets being issued right at the start is likely high, but it does tend to go down to a certain point. So we would expect the same thing here, because when people sort
as
of
people get more used to the fact that it's out there,
they don't want to get another ticket. They tend to drive at the speed limit. So that's what we want to learn, and in terms from that perspective. So we're going to take the time over the spring and early summer to review the data, and then we'll bring back a report to Committee 6, probably in the fall, assuming that we're good to go this next spring with the photo radar. That would outline a program. It would talk about sort of what we learned, as well as projected revenues based on the number of cameras we have out.
So we don't have any metrics today, though, to say to the people who've come up and said, what about future funding, to give them a sense of what that dollar amount might be?
Not at this point, because it also depends on the number of cameras, right? So if you have 10 cameras versus 100 cameras, that'll be a lot greater. But we also want to make sure that where we put the cameras, it's focused on safety, because that's the ultimate goal. We don't want this, you know, automated enforcement to be a cash cow in terms of we're just putting on a street where we know everybody speeds. We want it to focus specifically, and that's why we're doing schools, because that's where the most vulnerable users, and the locations that we've selected are at areas where we have speeding issues, and we want to see what the effectiveness of those are. And our goal would be to expand that citywide through the report next year.
So next year at budget time, you'll have only had the speed cameras in place, best case scenario from the spring forward. Will you be coming forward with a plan at budget time next year to say the speed cameras are underperforming in terms of revenue? We think we need X dollars in order to carry on with what you've approved with this plan, and say to us, these are the dollars that we need. Regardless of what's coming in from the speed cameras, these are the dollars that we need to achieve our goals.
In terms of the road safety action plan? Yeah, so we would, as part of the, when we bring forward the report for the automated enforcement, we'll sort of project based on what we learned, what we would see in terms of revenue. In terms of funding, we will try to seek any type. I mean, there's also the automated license plates, and over the last, I think, 18 months, we've collected over $2 million in revenues. And so there's that. There's the school bus camera. So there's 3 or 4, and the red light cameras too, moving forward after 2020. That potentially could add revenue. So the plan would be at budget time, we'd sort of make an estimate of how much revenue, and then based on that, that would become our plan. So,
but the short answer is the funding bump you've identified in 2020, that's not the end of the funding for this program.
No, and the intent would be, you know, it's to make it sustainable, we'll use that revenue. I just can't give you a number today because we just don't have the data from the automated enforcement.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to advise people, it's noon. We still have several councillors who wish to speak on this item, and we have 2 fairly hefty items left on the agenda. So my intention is to break after this item is done for lunch, and we'll come back 1/2 hour after that break. So if anyone is here for term of council or budget, please feel free to go and do what you need to do and come back a half hour after we break. The next speaker is Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank you for all the work you've been doing over the years. Mr. Wilkinson, I met you when I was a trustee because you did a lot of work with the walking school bus and safety on routes to schools, and I appreciate that. Lots of work to do, and it's something that was very, very important to me. I was on the committee for the active transportation, which Asta chaired, and my frustration with it is that it was very hard to grow walking school buses because there was no representative, political representative anyway, on that committee, that advisory committee. So we were all talking to each other back then. But I'm pleased to see you're looking at least at expanding the program. I guess it's still going to be through Asta for the walking school bus.
The walking school bus will be run through our travel demand management program and transportation planning. I believe the plan is to develop a hybrid model with paid volunteers and paid personnel and volunteers running each of the routes.
Thank you. I have to admit that kind of irks me because we wouldn't have volunteer school bus drivers, but we consider it okay for the walking school bus. I think we have to treat it as a serious step forward in terms of promoting active transportation. So why we leave it to, that it's okay to have volunteers do it when we wouldn't do that for other things. I want to get an idea of backlogs, because for the adult crossing guard program, you say you're going to have 10 new locations. Well, how many are warranted right now?
At this point, all the warranted locations have guards at them, so the 10 new guards for next year are based on the studies that we'll do next spring, and depending on the numbers that meet warrants, then we'll fund those. If there's more than 10, then we'll fund the top 10 based on the priority list, and then the others would have to wait either for additional funding at some point next year like we did this year, or it would wait till the following budget cycle.
You don't know how many is on the waiting list right now?
No, I think we've got about 30 or 40 requests.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things we're also doing as part of this plan is to proactively go out and look at areas where we have a lot of pedestrians, because right now we take in the requests, but there are some areas that people just don't know that you can actually ask for a guard. So we want to go and take a look at that, and that's something that we're going to start working on next year as well, to make sure that we're fully representing where the issues are. And we're going to work with our police as well as health in that perspective, because they've got community officers out in the schools. And so by providing them that information, we can potentially ensure safety for everyone in the city.
I know that it's always tough to tell a school that you might be getting a crossing guard, but we have to see if you come up in the lottery kind of thing, because there's only so many dollars for it. Is it possible to get an idea of how much it would cost to actually cover off those that are warranted?
Well, the cost for a guard is about $12,000 to $12,500 a year. And the number that are warranted, now over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a bump because of the changes Asta did with the school busing. So we'll see next year in terms of, like I said, the requests that have come in is between 30 and 40. Over the last couple of years, we've been in the 70s in terms of requests that have come in. But from a prioritization, we do look at the most vulnerable locations first. So for example, if it's a mid-block location, that would get a higher priority than if it's warranted at a traffic light, because at a traffic light, you've already got that thing. So.
No, I appreciate that, but I think when people put that request in, they're worried about their child's safety, and if it warrants, it warrants. One of the things I observed in Quebec is they have walking school bus signage on the streets, where they actually put signs up at corners and saying this is a corridor scolaire. Would you consider that idea? Because it encourages people to realize that kids, it's not just at crossings, but kids go through this neighborhood and walking.
That's something we can consider.
Okay, because I see it throughout Quebec, and it just reminds you that children are walking through these neighborhoods, particularly on when it comes to roads that are a little busier. So I appreciate that. I have to ask this question because I was looking at the list of those you consulted with. How did you apply the gender equity lens in terms of how you dealt with these issues?
At the time, Councillor, we, through the work we've done over the years with Safer Roads Ottawa, we have a fairly robust group of organizations and individuals that we've would consider some of our key partners, whether it's the Council on Aging, Bike Ottawa, members of Walk Ottawa, the representatives from the Ottawa Disability Coalition. So at the time that we put together the consultations, I would have to say we didn't necessarily apply a specific gender lens to it, but what I can tell you from the membership that actually attended and the representatives, we had a very, very good balanced a group of people in the room. But again, that would be my mistake, is that I didn't ensure, as the person leading the consultations, that we applied the lens, and we'll, as a takeaway, we'll make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Yes, I appreciate that, because when we did our meeting, the session back in September 30th, one of the top issues that came up was just security and safety. And this applies to road safety too, how people feel in their communities, and it's in terms of how they feel about crossing the street or walking in their neighborhoods. So I think this is really important because it's perceived safety in terms of just getting around their neighborhood, and this is something, of course, that we want to promote. So I thank you. I hate to admit it, but I have to agree with the Vice President of FCA on some of the points he made. In terms of the fact that sometimes you just don't get to the full list of all the priorities, that when I present as a councillor the things that are a priority, we can only just take like the top one or two for my area, for the ward. I think we need to look at assessing how we can get through these, because they're all priorities. The top concern in my ward is traffic calming and making safety measures for getting through their community and reducing speed. I wanted to talk to you about speed bumps, because they're probably one of the most popular requests I get, and I get already about the concern about emergency vehicles. But is it possible to include them in a higher priority? I noticed you use it as the symbol here for traffic calming. I think it's probably the one that's the most effective in terms of actually making people slow down. Signs don't seem to work, as has been mentioned.
In terms of sort of the measures, there's a toolbox of measures. So speed humps may be appropriate on certain streets. We may want to narrow roadways, constrict roadways, and I think that's in terms of the permanent work that's been done under Ms. Chee's group. They look at all those different types of options, so raised crosswalks or raised intersections. So it depends on the context of the street in terms of what you will do. I think, in an urban area, you've got cars that park on the street. That can act as a very good traffic calming. It's very inexpensive. I know when I go to meetings with people, the first question I ask them is, do people park their cars on the street? Some they say yes, some they say no. I say, well, you can fix your speeding problem or address it in 10 minutes by parking your car on the street. So there's a toolbox of things that we do, but specifically for the measures to get to the 30, that'll be one of the things that we will be looking at.
Okay. Thank you. In terms of when I look at this list, as well as gender equity, one of the you've got a really good list, don't get me wrong, in terms of who you've consulted on this. But if I could add, in terms of just reaching grassroots, you have FCA, which represents the Citizens Association. I would suggest you also include something like OCASC, which is the Association of Parent Groups for Schools, because that's who I hear from the most, is parents. And of course, as a counselor, I reach out to them in terms of parent counseling. But I think as a whole, I think it would be good to have their vision as well, because they're sending their kids out every day, and they certainly see things. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Kavanagh. And to confirm, all warranted crossing guards are fully funded.
That's correct.
That's right.
As of today, yeah.
And we're studying future requests. Or we have 30 requests for maybe we want a crossing guard, and we're studying whether or not they meet the warrants.
That's right, and those studies occur in the spring?
Sure. And so you have absolutely no idea how many will meet the warrants?
Not at this point.
And
It
so
varies year from
therefore,
year.
we have no idea how much money it would cost to fund them all.
Yeah, so on average, I mean, the average has gone up a bit over the last couple of years, but
Yeah.
previous to that, it was about 10 a year, and that's why we picked that
Yeah.
number that's in the budget.
Yeah, no, it's just very hard to predict what will be warranted or not. Councillor Brockington has asked that I ask a couple questions on his behalf because he had to step out to take care of his child because of the strike. So his first question is, how did staff arrive at 20% as the reduction in deaths and serious injury over 5 years? I know Keith asked it, but Riley wants to ask it as well.
Yeah, so as the chair through you and to Councillor Eglai, who's no longer here, the similar question is, originally or as part of the overall community consultation, our community partners asked us to come to a very specific and attainable goal, and as staff, we came back to the table with 20%.
Perfect. And his second question is, how will future budgets be augmented to make physical changes to roads in established neighborhoods?
Well, I mean, future budgets, so it'll depend on the amount of funds, if we go with the recommendation that's before you today in terms of automated enforcement. Again, the funding for this program is all data-driven, so we will be looking at the data every year and identifying what the data is telling us, and that will help us develop where we want to fund the measures to reduce the fatalities and serious collisions. So just say that, next year the plan will be the same as what we have this year. It may be the same or it may be different based on what the data says.
¬ If you could maybe send Councillor Brockington a note on that, that'd probably be very helpful. The next speaker is Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks for the report. I think there's a lot to like in the report, that it sets out a plan, but there's still some areas obviously to be desired. But I think that there's a bunch of good in there as well. So I'll get into the areas that I think are still left to be desired. Just on the motion I've put forward for 5 and 6, so I've had a good chat with staff about the timelines on this and made a slight edit to the timeline. I just want to make sure that you have the resources to be able to complete the actions in number 6, and that bringing back options as part of the 2021 SRSAP annual report with implications for us to look at a zero traffic fatalities by 2035. Is that something you're able to do in the timeline presented in the report?
Yeah, we're able to do that. It'll be a high level, sort of like a framework,
Yep.
similar to what we did with our response to the 30 kilometers. So we would be able to adopt that. If it's to get into more details on specifics, then that won't be enough time.
No, I think the high level is what we're looking for at that point, so that's very, very helpful. And we've also spoken about in the motion that a meaningful year-over-year reduction, which I think jives with what you're saying in this report, but actually sets out a target for us. Is that something you can work with?
Yeah, I mean, our goal is to be down to 0 because 1 is too many. We set the 20% to get an achievable target. It's, it's going to take, a lot of years to get to there. I'd like to be able to say that, we approve this plan tomorrow, that we know more, but I know that's not going to happen. So I think, our goal is to set that every year we see a continued reduction, and then the funding that goes into the plan addresses those areas where we're seeing those things so that we hit the mark to get those even lower.
That's part of what I like about the plan, is because there's elements in there that, depending on funding, can be accelerated or not, and there's some choices that we've got on intersections. So there's some good associated with that portion. I do want to make sure we're genuine about our figures, though, right? Because we've been talking about sort of Sweden versus Ottawa, a city versus a country, and because of the rural areas. But then when you look at, Stockholm, the city that's there, within the suburban and urban areas, their fatalities or major injuries are more like 0.5 per 100,000 rather than ours at around 2. So, we certainly there's, in terms of Vision Zero, what they've implemented in Sweden, when we compare it to other cities, I think it's helpful for us to make sure we're we're not just too rosy on it, we have some work to do here. And then also comparison to other cities in Canada in the different areas, because we're unique with our rural area, but then if you could say, look at these rural areas here versus this urban and suburban area, it gets to some more like versus like. In terms of the report and what we're going to see, one of the things that the consultant said in the document one is that one of the biggest improvements that could be made to safety is by expanding the protected bike network. Do you agree with that statement? I believe it was the highest improvement, 58 to 74%.
Well, I think any improvement to all different modes. I mean, the challenge with the most vulnerable road users is, pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists is they're not protected like when you're in a car when you have a collision. So, if we can dedicate our resources to specific issues. So, for example, we're going to be coming forward in, I believe it's April at committee to talk about the high volume cycling and vehicle intersections, to come up with a plan in terms of, I think we've identified just over 30 locations that will have a sort of a functional design to say, these are the locations based on the data as well as feedback we've had from the community. It's going to cost X number of dollars. This is what we could do if we had that money. So that's what we're going to try to target, those things, but we also have cognizant that, this road safety action plan is for everywhere in the city. We're also seeing challenges out in the rural areas where we have an overrepresentation of fatalities because of the higher speeds and the designs. So we need to try to balance everything to make sure that we're targeting and addressing the fatalities around the city.
Okay, and in terms of what this will meaningfully change for some of the streets we've got, let's just take some examples. So for example, we just did Queen and Elgin, right? Would those have potentially been done differently had this report been passed in terms of how we did those streets versus what we've got there now?
Well, those streets were designed for 30 kilometers an hour. So I know on Queen Street, when you drive through there, I was there around 7 o'clock a month or so ago driving it, and everyone was going between 30 and 35. There weren't people going like in the past where there's nobody there, you're going 50 or 60 or 70. There we've got raised intersections, we've got roadway narrowings, and similar to Elgin Street, you can even see now the curb lines that are starting to appear, and it's a lot narrower. So I'm expecting the speeds that used to be in the 50s are going to be a lot lower. So I mean, that's one type of street. There's the others like Main Street. We got the segregated facilities. So all the designs that we're going to be putting in place has that complete street lens, and with a goal, especially in the core area, to design at the lower speeds, because we know there's so many more pedestrians and cyclists traveling through these corridors.
I guess I'm just thinking about the stat out there that it's cheaper for us, if we're building a bike lane, it's cheaper for us to have that raised, separated facility along with the sidewalk, and for our snowplow operators as well to clear it, right? But that's a cheaper thing for us than doing it on the street at grade with the road, is my understanding. It's actually cheaper to go up, and so in some cases it may make sense. But just on the roads, so Bronson's going to get redone at some point, right? So would this report change anything to do with how Bronson would get redone?
Well, I mean, again, Bronson, we have to look at also the context of the road. With being a major arterial road, if you reduce lanes and you take lanes away, there's still a lot of traffic. Then traffic starts going onto residential streets, which we don't want. So we're trying to find this balance in terms of that. So, but for Bronson, there may be opportunities to design it so that instead of traveling at 50 or 55, they're down closer to 30 or 40. So I mean, ultimately that would be the goal, but we also have to be cognizant that we still need to have a transportation network to move the vehicles that do travel through the city. So it's trying to find that balance in terms of enhancing the safety so that if collisions occur, people don't get hurt, but also not creating situations where people start shortcutting down residential streets. And usually when they do that, they're going at higher speeds because they're trying to catch up on time, which is the worst thing we want. So.
Okay, but the practical implications of redoing a street like Bronson, based on this report, would be what? Things like the intersections would be redesigned in a
potentially,
safer
yeah,
manner? Or is it all just sort of we'll see how it goes, or is there anything in there that's no, this is going to change as a result when you do redo a street like Bronson?
I mean, I'd have to look at the Bronson, but I could see potentially maybe we have raised crosswalks going along Bronson at the cross streets, so pedestrians, because there's more pedestrians going north-south than there are east-west. So providing that could be an option. Maybe we look at some raised intersections. gradual. So I mean, those are the kind of things, I think you need to take the context of the road so that what you design on Bronson may be different than what you would design on Bank Street or what you design on Elgin Street, because they have different like there's just a different type of areas in the road and the landscape.
Okay. We also, in the report, see that we want to ensure that we have safety of vulnerable road users come first, and that Rob had mentioned, Mr. Wilkinson had mentioned around safety trumping flow, right? That it's not just all about flow, that we need to make sure that people are safe. That's our goal here. So how does that translate in this plan? Just to be practical about it, right? If that's what we're saying, what are the practical implications on things like revert reds, intersections, right-on reds where there's a cycle track, advanced walk and bike signals? I know there's some stuff of that in the report. The funding that we've got for those things is quite low, to be honest. But what are going to be the practical implications of saying safety trumps flow wherever possible for things like those things I mentioned?
Well, I think some of the measures that you've identified is not a high cost. So for the work that we're going to do with the red reverts, where we're going to, they won't be in place at pathways with bike lanes or on bike lanes. It's just a change in the controller. So we've got fundings to make sure that there's no conflicts with other features of the traffic controller. But it's not like it's $1,000 a location to do one. Once we've got it working, it's basically enabling something. So there's some measures that aren't very expensive, and so the leading pedestrian indicator would be one example. We just have to be careful because, if it's trying to find that balance. Safety will be the ultimate in terms of we want to make sure our roads are the safest, but we also don't want to create situations that the implications of doing something at an intersection at one point makes it less safe at another one. Right. So in the core, it's more the queuing. In terms of if we implement something at an intersection and downstream, all of a sudden what used to be vehicles didn't block the intersection, now they do. Well, you've made it less safe for that intersection. So it's that balance that we need to
That makes sense. And then in terms of councillors around the table, saying Councillor Dudas Ward, if she says, I don't want, there's a right on red here, we've been getting a lot of potential accidents there. If Councillor Dudas wants to say, look, can we not have this right on this red anymore? What happens at that point? Do you just review the intersection? Is it the same thing that happens now, or is there something in this report that'll say, no, there's more authority to the councillor to say, this is a real concern, we need some action on this?
I mean, we would, any intersection in the city, we'd bring recommendation in terms of if it's a safety, we would say, you know what, we need to put this in. If the ward councillor doesn't agree with that, they could come to committee and get that reversed, if that would be.
You've identified some in the report, right, where we're going to automatically change them right away, and others where we're saying we're going to review.
Yeah, exactly. I think our plan was to there's some locations so where we have the bike pockets, we'll put those in.
The bike box.
Or the double right turns.
Right.
So we already put those in. So there's a lot of stuff that are already in place that will just get put in. Okay. If there's others where we see from a road safety perspective that it would enhance safety, then we would bring that, we would make that recommendation, and our hope would be the ward council would agree. Okay. If they didn't, then we would have conversations, and ultimately we would come to committee.
Okay, just on beg buttons. So one of the things I had requested earlier on is, because sometimes when you're at a light and the light turns green for the car, you haven't touched the beg button to go. The light turns green for the car, but you don't get a walk signal, but the car gets to go, it's green. And so we've said, look, can we look into an option of saying, when that car gets to go, because they're going anyway, the car, you can have the beg button that's there, but when they get to go, the walk signal also just automatically turns on. So it's just triggered by the green light rather than, say, somebody pushing the button. So do we have that technology now, or are you saying that we're going to be getting there with that technology?
So, I mean, we have the technology, we just need to review it through our traffic system to ensure that it doesn't deal with other issues in terms of the safety of the traffic control system. So the plan is to, and also the impact of the leading pedestrian interval, because we want to make sure that if we were to do that, because we have looked at doing it at streets to that if you do it there, that you can't use a leading pedestrian interval. Well, from our perspective, we'd prefer to have the leading pedestrian interval because studies have shown that it enhances safety. So in those situations, what we've done, like we did on Bank Street, is that we run it fixed time during the day, which allows us to do that. So we're in the process of, and we'll be doing that this spring, to review that, to ensure that if we do have that feature in the controller, that it doesn't prevent us from doing the leading pedestrian interval.
Okay.
So it's in the progress, and the idea would be to do it at locations where the crossing times for pedestrians, so probably like 4-lane roadways, are similar or not too much different than what the time is for vehicles. Because the last thing we want to do, especially when you get outside of the core, where it's 30 or 35 or 40 seconds on some of the wider roads, that you bring that up if there's only one car, because then all of a sudden you've got this interval that's 40 seconds long, and especially if there's not a lot of pedestrian volume, it just becomes a challenge from a road safety and a management perspective, because then people know that always cycles, they're going to tend to want to speed to not hit the red light, and it's just sort of a winding road that's
Okay.
not...
Councillor, you're well over your time.
Oh, I am?
and,
Okay.
Like well over your time. So if you wanted to take 10 seconds, that'd be fine. Otherwise, we need to move on.
You know what? It's okay. Thanks very much,
Okay,
Chair.
thank you. Councillor Leeper.
When the police want to talk to you. Thank you very much, Chair. First set of questions. One of the cynicisms that I've heard, and I kind of feel myself when I've read the plan, is we have a goal of eventually achieving zero. We have a plan of achieving some quantifiable amount on our way to zero. That's great. But I'm glad, okay. Mr. Manconi is not here, or Mr. Wiley. One of the key signals, and Superintendent McKenna is here, one of the key signals that we can send to the community that we're serious about that is to ensure that the people who are driving City of Ottawa trucks, people who are driving OC Transpo buses, and police whose job it is to enforce laws are obeying the laws around particularly bike lanes. Every day I see the discussion on social media. There's a police officer, there is a OC Transpo driver, there's a City of Ottawa truck that is doing something that jeopardizes pedestrian and cycling safety. Can we address that in a meaningful way?
We can talk to, I'll talk to John and also our fleet group, because I know they do fleet training. Like every person who drives a City of Ottawa vehicle has to go through training through fleet. And so we can talk to our colleagues in that service area to ensure that's I'm assuming that they do that today. I'm not sure if there's anybody from fleet that can talk to that here, but again, it's to highlight that fact that, and I know even talking with my staff, because I have staff throughout in the field, I'm always reminding them that, you know what, would you stop your vehicle in a traffic lane?
Right.
You shouldn't be stopping your lane in a bike lane, or you shouldn't be stopping your vehicle in a sidewalk. And it's also an education to contractors, because both the ones that help us build and rehabilitate our roads, but also utilities in terms of the work that they do. That if you do have to block a sidewalk because your manhole's right there, well, put in the proper signage to let pedestrians, or if it's the bike lanes, cyclists, have a safe area to go around.
Yeah, I think it's critical that we be purposeful in pursuing that over the course of the next while. We've talked a lot about design this morning, and I just want to read one paragraph from a response to, I think it was Councillor Menard and McKenney, with respect to an earlier direction that they had provided with respect to eliminating floating lanes and stuff like that. And in the response, it says, I think this is in reference to floating lanes and non-protected painted bike lanes. In many locations, the existing painted bike lanes and floating bike lanes are an acceptable design solution. If we're going to rely on users using facilities that are in the way in which they're designed, the design has got to be right in the first place. How are we going to ensure that we are getting design right?
A couple of the items that are identified through the Road Safety Action Plan for that purpose would certainly be the Road Safety School, which will help designers look at their work and make decisions based on road safety. Another item would be the road safety audit program that we're hoping to start up, which would help us identify through new constructions, reconstructions, what the safest facility would be for all road users.
Depending who's looking at that and what sort of standards they're using, that implies different levels of safety. So with respect to, existing painted bike lanes and floating bike lanes are an acceptable design solution. That's according to the Transportation Association of Canada and the Ontario Traffic Manual. The Ontario Traffic Manual is probably several years behind in terms of cycling safety. How are we going to ensure that we are looking at the most forward-looking, most recent research with respect to how we design our roads?
So, the Ontario Traffic Manual, I believe it's in the last 2 or 3 years, they've created a cycling manual that discusses and provides content on all the different type of features. I know that we've got staff that are at the city that are on that working group, and I believe, I don't know if Ms. Chi would know if you want to come up. Mr. Grimwood can give an update because I believe he's the one who's on that working group.
Because we know that there are organizations like NATCO that are, much more forward-looking than some of the other national organizations. And I want to make sure that if we're designing things and relying on people to use the facilities as designed, that they are the safest possible design.
So, Mr. Chair, just to share that the city is participating in the current update to the Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18 for cycling facilities. And as part of that process, we are looking at best practices from elsewhere. You mentioned NACTO, that's one of the references. And so we do keep track of those latest developments in terms of design and best practice. And the new Book 18 project is coming to a conclusion, so we do expect within the next year or so that manual will be available. But we are already referring to it for reference in terms of our practice.
Okay. Bike Ottawa was here. Are you engaged with Bike Ottawa as we talk about potential updates to the OTM?
The update of that manual is led by the Ontario Traffic Council, which is primarily funded through the Ministry of Transportation for Ontario. And so it is an initiative led by that group, and it's primarily focused on practitioners and industry.
But as you are sitting at the table, how is your input being shaped by those who use the facilities here in Ottawa?
We do have a good relationship with our communities and advocacy groups on the various topics, and so when we participate in projects like the Book 18 update, we do bring that perspective as part of our general practice. So we do consider those perspectives in our input to the process.
Okay. Moving on. With respect, again, I'm still struck by the fact that 61% of our FMIs involve some sort of high-risk driving. If everyone simply drove well, we probably wouldn't need to spend millions and millions of dollars redesigning our streets. But we know they don't, and so we have to. Automated enforcement of speed is obviously something we're starting to make good progress on. We have automated enforcement of the red light cameras. What are some of the next horizons, especially as cameras become cheaper and the computer processing power to take a look at other kinds of infractions becomes possible? Are we looking at how to use automated enforcement on no right on red, unsafe lane changes? Like, there's any number of areas where high-risk behaviors are imperiling other road users that could be enforced more cheaply if we had the right cameras and the right algorithms in place. Is there a next horizon past red light camera and speed?
Through the chair to you, Councillor, as part of the Safer Roads Ottawa budget in 2020, the steering committee has approved a funding envelope of about $75,000 specifically to new technology, which essentially lets us loose into the domain of technology and looking at other jurisdictions and seeing what they've successfully implemented. I know in speaking with my colleague Krista Tanaka, we both have a concern about bus lane enforcement. And really, from an automated perspective, there probably is no reason for us to use humans to do that type of enforcement because cameras could work very, very well. So we will be trying to pursue that type of pilot, working closely with our colleagues at the Ottawa Police Service and the Traffic Enforcement Unit, but it won't stop there. We've also seen some technology around stop sign enforcement that takes place in California. So we're always looking for the newest and best thing.
Yep. The rolling stops. Obviously, we have, I don't even know how many thousands of intersections in Ottawa. The rolling stops are putting pedestrians at peril, and that seems like a really interesting candidate to try to enforce with automation, because we'll never have a cop on every single one of those corners. So I'm pleased to hear that we're pursuing that. The final question I have is around the same thing I think the FCA identified when I was writing about the Road Safety Action Plan, recently identified the same piece from the consultant's report. It's worth saying one more time, if the current safety efforts by the city and its partner agencies are maintained but not altered, the likelihood is low that a significant reduction in either the number or severity of FMI collisions will be achieved, especially in the context of increasing traffic volumes. To succeed in effectively reducing collisions within the city by enhancing existing programs or developing new ones, significant additional resources are required. There's no quantification here of what significant additional resources are. Can you give me your interpretation or your understanding of what those significant additional resources would be? Does that mean we need to spend 50 million, 250 million, 2 billion?
I think you'd have to be in the billions to give an exact number. But if you think of how large the city is, I think it's 100 kilometers in width and about 80 kilometers in depth. And just I think we have over about 6,000 kilometers worth of roads. Just to look at those and to implement things, you're talking billions. Just for example, the street lighting on the 174, to put that up to current standards, because it is within an urban and suburban area, is $50 million just to do that. So it doesn't come cheap to do some of these things. And I think when we bring forward the report in April on the cycling facilities, that's going to be another one that's going to be a pretty big number. So it's a challenge, and that's why one of the things is where the difference between what we've seen here in North America and in European countries is that the funding comes from a lot of the funding comes from the federal government because they have the ability to fund those things, but it all comes down to priorities. So.
We'll continue talking to Minister McKenna particularly about that. Thank you,
If
Chair.
I could just add one quick point, Councillor, about that. I think it's one part funding, as Mr. Landry mentioned, but I think some of the policy components that are inside the Road Safety Action Plan will have very, very affordable and very quick implications to making it safer. So as new communities come online, and if those residential streets are actually functioning and operating at 30K, you won't need to see Mr. Landry, you won't need to see me with my lawn signs, and you certainly won't need to see any of the traffic enforcement officers from the Ottawa Police. And I think that should be our goal with setting some of these policies, is take staff out of the equation, build it better from the get-go.
That is probably the most exciting part about the plan that's in front of us right now, is that decision to start redesigning all of our new streets now for 30K. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And just because Councillor Leeper likes it, I'm going to toot my own horn. The first subdivision to have 30K is the Minto subdivision in Orleans, because I put it in the subdivision agreement. Councillor Luloff.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je suis très impressionné par ce plan. J'ai l'impression que vous avez y avez consacré beaucoup d'efforts. C'est prospectif. J'aime votre point que la sécurité doit toujours l'emporter sur la circulation. Gateway signage has been really wonderful in Orleans, has been quite helpful, getting rid of some of the visual distractions on our streets as well. I'm also glad to hear that red light cameras and speed cameras revenues will be reinvested in the RSAP, compounding the investment that we're making in this, which will make it more progressive over time, which is great. Un projet de resurfage des routes est-il considéré comme une reconstruction? Je veux juste m'assurer que les projets futurs sont cohérents et qu'ils font partie du contexte actuel. For example, we've got in Queenswood Heights, Des Epinette, which is classed as a major collector. We've got permanent traffic calming measures, speed humps, and a raised PXO. Then we have, parallel to it, Amiens, which is classified as a collector. It has permanent traffic calming measures scheduled for 2021 with bulb outs and raised PXOs, which is going to help to reduce the speed through this neighborhood. But in between the two, we have a major cut-through, which is classified as a residential in Saint-Georges. It's in desperate need of resurfacing. I know that we're working right now to kind of bump that up on the list, but it acts as a cut-through between the two. So I'm asking, essentially, if we resurface that road, is it considered a complete reconstruction, or is it just a resurfacing? What's the difference between a resurfacing project and a reconstruction project?
I'll ask Monsieur Gontier to answer that.
Chair, no, resurfacing is not a reconstruction. Essentially, when we're resurfacing the road, we're essentially taking the top layer of asphalt off, grinding it off, and then repaving that layer. Now, that being said, even when we're resurfacing roads, we still work closely with Mr. Landry's group in terms of trying to see if there are opportunities to integrate traffic calming opportunities that may not require basically the road to be modified itself, but if we're looking at integrating speed humps and those types of initiatives, those can be more easily integrated into the project. If we're looking at either narrowing the road where we're starting to change where the curbs are, providing cycle tracks, then that really takes the project to a different level. If we know that those are being planned, often what we'll do is we'll push the projects out so that we're able to coordinate those initiatives.
Okay, then. So what kind of project would constitute a reconstruction? Would something like replacing catch basins and that sort of thing on a street, would that be considered a reconstruction? We'll be able to look at reduction of speeds to 30 kilometers an hour in the suburbs in that sort of situation?
I think from our perspective, reconstructions, if you're basically removing the curb lines, so we're going down to the ash, so similar to what was done on Elgin Street, where you're basically taking the road out and reinstating it. So in terms of if it's just a replacement of a water main that's not changing the road works, that might not be. But again, it depends on what's required. So it may be that for that water main, they got to take out the curbs anyway. It's just we just don't want to, there's not funding in terms of the incremental cost to do them standalone, but if the road's already being torn up, then the cost to reinstate, especially if it's just removing curb lines, should be similar.
Understood. So on a road like St. George, it is a major cut through. You've got an operating speed of 30 or 40 on some of these what are considered collectors now, which should be the higher speed. My concern is that somebody's going to be driving along Des Epinette at 30, turning onto St. George, which has an operating speed of 50, and then turning on to Amiens to 30. So I just want to make sure that we're giving consideration to that. So is there an opportunity then with a resurfacing project to look at things like narrowing or visual narrowing or that sort of thing?
Yeah, and that's where we'd also work with Ms. Chee's group, because they manage the neighborhood traffic calming program. So if there's work being done on a certain street and there's as implications, I would expect that they would look at those as well, because I don't believe the intent of the neighborhood traffic calming is to move problems from one street to another.
No, certainly not.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilhoff. Are there any other people who want to speak or ask questions? You sure? You're sure? Yeah? Councillor Al-Shantieri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know everybody's gotten hungry to our staff. First of all, thank you for your presentation. And one of the things we spoke to you, Phil, about earlier about the paint or use on the road is wearing out in no time, but we were told you have a new machine and a new paint's going to be implemented in the next year. Is that correct?
Yeah, so actually, I think I approved an e-spot to commit the funds to get through that process to start to procure a machine. So that was approved in a report that came to committee in June. And the plan would be in 2021 to have a machine that applies more permanent paint. And that would be used for all rural roads and all arterial roads in the city.
In looking back at slide 14, with, Rob talked about the collision from 2013 to 2017, and no surprise, the rural area, the fatality is greater because the speed on those roads are higher than regular speed, but also is the lack of the paved shoulders. Like in one time we start to pave a little bit of shoulder, but they were not paved with the same quality of the road, so they didn't last very long, especially with the snow plow and other. And then you create a false expectation, so people think they have a paved shoulder, but reality is they cannot ride bicycle on it, so they were riding on 80-kilometer road, and that's some of the fatality. I would imagine it will be severe in those areas. So it's one of the recommendations, like you're talking about lightning and other, but you don't talk about paving some of the shoulders. So is there a plan to pave some of those shoulders?
In terms of specifically paving shoulders, I think that's been looked at in the past from a cycling perspective to see if we know there's cyclists along the road. I think the intent when we pave is not to put the edge of the shoulder or the edge of the pavement right at the yellow line, that there's always a buffer. What we're proposing in this plan here is what we call a safety edge. So a lot of roads that get built, when you get to the end of the asphalt, it goes down at a 90-degree. And then you got the gravel that goes to the side. Over time, that gravel tends to dissipate. So the idea is to put it at sort of a 30 to 45-degree angle, so that if someone runs or starts to drive off the shoulder, what we see, either they over-exaggerate and they get it into the ditch, or they try to they compensate and they go too much. And when they get back on the asphalt, they tend to go in the opposite direction. And if there's a car coming at 80 kilometers an hour, that's not a good situation. So that safety edge is meant to reduce that action of overcompensating. So the intent is, as roads get resurfaced in rural areas, we would put that in place. In terms of widening the shoulder to an extra 2 meters to provide cycling facilities, I think that's done on a case-by-case basis. I don't know, Mr. Conti, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, Chair, just to expand, right now what we use as a guide to determine whether shoulders are paved or not in rural areas is really governed by the cycling plan that was approved by council. If it's part of a designated route, then it would receive wider shoulders for cycling. If it's not, then it would be basically a conventional approach.
But if I understand correctly, that's only when you rebuild the road, not for the existing roads. Is that correct?
At the time of resurfacing, if there's enough shoulder width to be able to accommodate the paved shoulder, and it's part of the cycling network, then we wouldn't be including the paved shoulder at that point. The only time we would not be including it is if there's really not enough shoulder width to accommodate. And at that point, we would be working with transportation planning to see what alternate corridor can be used to be able to facilitate the cycling plan.
To our staff, and I know in the past you have done it, the organized tours or bicycle tours to the rural area, we see it well organized, police involved, directing traffic, but we're talking about the other group who do not reach out to the city for a permit or even for notification. And I know that the rural area is great to cycle on it, to say the least. So is there a way we can somehow message those local clubs before they take their student or their rider to their, they should notify the police or the city or get some kind of permit? Because really when we have a large group going, it's great. Everything runs smoothly, the police involved, they block traffic. But when other clubs take small number of bicycles, without a permit or without notification to city, then we see some trouble sometimes. Or how could we pass on that message?
Chair, through you to the councillor, what I would say is we could certainly look at that as a takeaway, councillor, as we start to have discussions with some of the larger cycling organizations like the Ottawa Bicycle Club and so forth, and maybe have some meetings with them and the Ottawa Police Service to talk about some of your concerns, for sure.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was quick.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I don't see any other questions, and I don't have anyone on the speakers list. I have a couple questions related to some of the motions. First, I want to thank you for all the hard work over the last 2 years or 2.5 years, whatever it's been. It's an amazing report. I want to thank Councillor Eglai and the members of the last Transportation Committee for asking you to do it. Just on the motion about, just let me pull it up, establishing zero by 2035, and then point 2 is to come back with cost implications in 2021. Ms. Similik, can you remind us what updates to various financial plans are scheduled for this term of council?
Chair, the plans that we're going to refresh and it will, in this term of council, will include both your, the transit long-range financial plan. That'll be done shortly. Then the next one actually is of interest to you will be the citywide one, which deals with roads and facilities. In order for us to do that, though, Mr. Gontier has to finish his refreshed asset management plan, which he believes, he told me he has to have done by mid-21 for transportation. And once we've got that, combined with what should come out of the Transportation Master Plan, we should have a refreshed plan in front of you in 2022.
Okay, and so I'm wondering, would it make just more sense to have the information on what it would take to achieve the 2035 number as part of that kind of package of reports on financing, transportation issues in 2022 as opposed to 2021, just so it's coming at the same time, I guess?
It would make sense, especially if it's integrated with all the other things that we're doing and the needs are identified. We would be able to put it in a cohesive plan dealing with all of those issues as opposed to one-offs.
So, Councillor Menard, I'm wondering if you would amend your motion to reflect that.
Yeah, that sounds fine, as long as, I mean, so is it that you would work with them on, because this is essentially the plan that you would bring forward in conjunction with staff, right? I mean, I just want to make sure that the processes make sense. So I'm happy with that. The 2022 is fine. I think if we can see something that you're producing in 2021 anyway, right, in terms of the high-level piece, that would then inform the piece that they're putting together. Is that possible?
Well, we will work with LA and Ms. Similuk to do that, so they would be all in a cohesive package.
Okay, so that's fine. Just if we can get like an interim, I guess I can ask Phil offline for an interim update or something in 2021.
Yeah, so I think point 2 of the motion should read something like, instead of 2021 SRSAP annual report, in conjunction with transportation financial plan updates expected in 2022 or something to that effect. Something to that effect.
That makes sense.
Is that friendly?
That's
amendment?
friendly.
Yeah, wonderful. Clerks, I'm sure you can write it up in such a way that it's legal and makes sense to staff?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, wonderful. Does anyone else like to speak to that particular change? No? Okay. So let's deal with the amendments or the motions first. Just give me one moment to put them in the right order here. So the first is the amendment on, or the motion asking the mayor to work with the federal and provincial governments. Is this item carried? Carried, thank you. The second item is Councillor Menard's motion to set a goal for 2035 and have the financial reporting as we just discussed.
Carried.
Carried. And the third motion is Councillor Leaper's motion asking for a report on how to do 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limits in the core and the Byward Market. Is that carried? Carried. And on the road safety action plan, as presented by staff, I'm going to ask for yeas and nays, please.
Okay. Councillor Ludoff,
Oui.
Councillor Dudas,
Oui.
Councillor El Shantiri,
Yes.
Councillor Fleury,
Absolument.
Councillor Menard,
Yes.
Councillor DeRuse, Councillor Hughley, Councillor Leaper,
Oui.
Councillor Blais.
Yes.
Carried.
The road safety action plan is approved. We are now going to take a break until, I'm saying it's 1 o'clock, so until 1:30. Thank you very much.